I was 19 when I realized first love can mean first person I decide to rebuild from the ground up. Not in the cute rom-com way. In the, I know your passwords better than you know your own mind way. My name is Daniel, and this happened during my second year at a small state university in Colorado. I just transferred from community college after a pretty rough year. My dad died of a stroke, my mom started leaning on me for everything, and my long-term girlfriend cheated on me with a guy in my econ class. By the time I moved into campus housing, I was numb, broke, and walking around like background noise in everyone else's life. That's the headspace I was in when I met Leah. We met in the most harmless way possible, a student mental health workshop on resilience after loss. I went because there was free pizza and I didn't want to be alone in my dorm. She sat down next to me, hair in a messy bun, oversized gray hoodie, eyes the color of old glass bottles, washed out, but sharp. She laughed at one of the counselor's dumb icebreakers and mouthed, "This is so stupid." And for the first time in months, I actually smiled. When it was our turn to share why we came, I mumbled something about family stuff. She said her therapist made her attend. We traded first names, nothing more, and I thought that would be the end of it. 2 days later, she ran into me outside the library. Same hoodie, same messy bun, same tired eyes. "Hey, resilience guy," she said, like we were already in the middle of a joke. She asked if I wanted coffee, said she hated awkward small talk, and preferred to get directly to the trauma. I laughed because it felt disarming, honest. Over lattes in the campus cafe, we traded curated pieces of our damage. I told her about my dad's sudden death and my ex cheating. She told me about weird family stuff, an overbearing mother, a father who left. Her voice was steady, but she watched me like she was measuring how each word landed. When I said, "I don't really trust anyone anymore," she tilted her head and said softly, "I won't make you regret trusting me." It sounded like a promise. Now it feels more like a threat. The first few weeks were the closest thing to normal I'd had in a long time. She texted me every morning, "Have you eaten? How did you sleep?" And at night she'd call just so we could fall asleep on the phone together. She said she liked hearing my breathing, that it calmed her. We weren't dating yet. We were just talking, though it felt deeper than any relationship I'd had. She showed up with soup when I was sick, highlighted my textbooks, sent me long, thoughtful messages about grief and how she understood feeling like people were temporary. When she finally said, "You're the first person I've ever felt safe with," I felt this heavy, warm responsibility anchor in my chest. When she asked me, very quietly, to be her boyfriend, I said yes before she finished the sentence. The first red flag looked like concern. My phone died one afternoon while I was in a 3-hour chemistry lab. When I turned it back on, I had 12 missed calls and 30-something texts from Leah. The first few were sweet. "Hey, you okay? Just checking in." Then they turned frantic, then accusatory. The last one said, "If you're with her, just say it. Don't ghost me like he did." When I called, she answered on the first ring, sobbing, saying she knew I'd left, that men always disappear when someone cares too much. I tried to explain lab rules and dead batteries, but she kept circling back to, "I can't go through that again. And I know you're different, but my body doesn't." I stayed on the phone for an hour, reassuring her until my voice was hoarse. I told myself it was trauma, not manipulation. From there, her care slid into something else. She asked me to share my class schedule so she could plan study dates. Then she wanted my work schedule, so she wouldn't bother me during shifts. Then she started asking for screenshots of my day, a picture when I got to class, when I left, when I sat down to study, when I went to sleep. I joked that it felt like parole. She smiled and said, "I just like knowing you're real." When I didn't respond quickly enough, she'd send, "Are you mad?" Followed by, "I knew this would happen." Then, "Tell me what I did." I'd end up apologizing without knowing for what. I told myself it was love, plus anxiety. Later I understood it was control with a soft voice. Little things started lining up wrong. One night, I told her I was going to the gym. Instead, my roommate convinced me to grab a burger 2 blocks off campus. We sat at a corner booth, laughing about something dumb, when I got a text from Leah. "Freeze look good." Attached was a photo of the back of my head, my roommate's shoulders, the edge of the ketchup bottle. I whipped around, heart pounding, but didn't see her anywhere. When I called, she answered calmly. "You didn't say you were going out," she said. "You said gym. Why lie?" I stammered something about changing my mind. She replied, "I'm not mad, I just need to feel like I'm not an afterthought." I hung up feeling like I'd done something terrible, even though I hadn't. A few days later, my roommate mentioned waking up at 2 a.m. and seeing a figure standing across the courtyard, facing our building. "Pretty sure it was your girlfriend," he said. "She was just staring up at our windows." I joked that she was dramatic, but my throat felt tight. When I asked Leah about it, expecting denial, she just smiled, that soft practice smile. "I like knowing you're safe enough to sleep," she said. "I like seeing your light go out and come back on." I asked what that meant. She replied, "Last time his light went out and never came back. I didn't get to say goodbye." I assumed she meant metaphorically. I was wrong. The real fracture came the night she told me about before me. We were in my car behind the student center, windows fogged, her fingers tracing circles on my forearm. She said she hadn't told me the whole story about her last boyfriend, Owen. That he'd cheated on her, that he'd made her feel crazy for needing reassurance. She described how he pulled away, slower replies, vague excuses. "I'm just busy," the same phrases my ex had used. She said he told her, "You deserve better," right before he blocked her on everything. 3 days later, she said, he was gone. His friends couldn't find him. His job reported him missing. His car was discovered parked at the edge of a wooded overlook 2 hours away, keys on the seat, doors locked, no sign of a struggle. The police assumed he'd jumped. No body was ever found. I felt sick. I asked if she was a suspect. She laughed, but it didn't sound amused. "I was the crazy ex, remember?" she said. "They thought I scared him off, not off a cliff." Then her voice went flat. I stayed up for months replaying every conversation, every text, trying to see where I failed him. I told her it wasn't her fault, that someone's suicide is never on one person. She watched me closely and whispered, "I know what I did wrong now." I pushed when I should have watched. This time, I'm not going to miss the signs. I asked what she meant. She smiled faintly. "I'll always know if you're slipping away. I'll see it days before you do. That's how I keep you safe from yourself." I changed the subject, but the air in the car felt heavy, like there was a third presence sitting in the back seat, listening. Things went from eerie to unbearable when I started noticing gaps in my own memory. One Saturday, I woke up at Leah's apartment with a headache, my shirt on inside out, and this grainy, unsettled feeling like you get after a weird dream. She said we'd stayed up late watching movies and I crashed. My phone showed no activity after 10 p.m., but my last clear memory was checking the time at 11:45. I brushed it off. Then it happened again 2 weeks later. Same pattern. I'd go over for dinner, have 1 glass of wine max, and then hours would vanish. I started waking up with scratches on my arms and thighs that I couldn't explain. When I asked her, she'd stroke my hair and say, "You really don't remember how rough you like it sometimes?" Her tone was half teasing, half accusing, like I was pretending to forget. I've never liked rough anything. One night, while she was in the shower, I snooped. I'm not proud of it, but by then I was scared. Her bedroom looked obsessively neat. No clutter, everything folded, books lined up by color. In the back of her closet, behind a row of dresses, I found a shoebox labeled therapy stuff. Inside wasn't therapy homework. There were printed emails, screenshots of messages, notes on yellow legal paper, my name underlined, bullet points about my habits, triggers, attachment patterns. Some of it sounded word for word like things I'd said to her, except twisted into case notes. At the bottom was a second folder with someone else's name, Owen. Same structure, schedules, likes, fears, emotional sweet spots, messy paragraphs about titrating abandonment. One line written in red stood out. He only accepted reality when confronted with the possibility of loss made permanent. There was no mention of his suicide, but under the date he disappeared, she had written, "Trial complete." The next day, I told her I needed a break. Not a breakup, just space. We sat on a bench near the quad where people were tossing frisbees and laughing like we were all in the same version of reality. I said I felt overwhelmed, that the constant check-ins and sleepovers were making it hard to think. She went very still. "You're repeating his script," she said quietly. "Do you realize that? Same words, same timing. I thought you were different." I told her I wasn't Owen. She tilted her head and said, "No, you're better. That's why I started earlier this time." I asked what that meant. She smiled without warmth. "I stopped waiting for you to notice what you need. I give you the right memories, the right feelings. You don't have to be destroyed by other people's choices again." Over the next week, my sense of self started to erode. I'd lose time in short bursts now, 15 minutes walking between classes, an hour sitting in the library. I'd come back to myself standing somewhere I didn't remember going. A couple friends asked if I was okay because I kept repeating the same stories in slightly different ways. My roommate said I'd woken him up at 3 a.m. standing in his doorway whispering, "She's already in there." I had no memory of it. I stopped drinking anything Leah handed me. She noticed. "You don't trust me," she said one night, eyes flat. "You're trying to think for yourself again. That didn't go well last time, remember?" I asked her what she meant by last time. She replied, "Some people only survive if someone else holds their choices for them." I finally broke when I checked my email and found drafts I didn't remember writing. Messages to professors withdrawing from classes, half-written apologies to my mom about needing to disconnect for my own good, even a draft to Leah saying I was sorry for leading her on. The language didn't sound like me. It sounded like therapy speak mixed with her favorite phrases. Attached to one draft was an audio file. My voice, flat and mechanical, reading, "I'm grateful you kept me from disappearing the way I almost did before." I have no memory of recording it. I confronted her in public, in the campus courtyard at noon, because I was afraid to be alone with her. She didn't raise her voice. She just said, "You told me you didn't want to cheat again. I believed you. So I'm taking away the people you cheat yourself with. Your past, your impulses, your cowardice." I ended it that day, out loud, with people around. "We're done, Leah. I don't want to see you again." She stared at me with an expression that made my skin crawl, sadness carefully painted over something much colder. "You're not breaking up with me," she said quietly. "You're just shifting phases. I'll give you a few weeks to integrate this story. You'll come back when it feels like your idea." I walked away. I transferred campuses 2 months later. I changed my number, nuked my social media, started therapy with someone who had never heard of her. Things stabilized. My memory started to feel like it actually belonged to me. A year after I left, on the anniversary of the day I'd met her at that workshop, I got an email from a burner account. No subject line, no text body, just one attachment, a recording labeled, "Initial Session, Daniel A." I opened it before I could stop myself. It was Leah's voice, calm and clinical, saying my name, my age, details about my family and grief. Then, presenting problem. Intense fear of abandonment following perceived infidelity in prior relationship. Treatment approach. Restructure narrative to remove self from sites of harm. Goal. Protect subject from future destabilization by editing his reality before he can be hurt again. At the very end, there was a faint rustling and my own voice, sleepy, agreeing to let her help. I've never gone back to that town. But sometimes, When I wake up from a nightmare with pieces missing, I wonder how much of me she still thinks she owns. Love that demands your memories, your time, and your identity in the name of protecting you is not love. Anyone who insists they know what you need better than you do and starts quietly editing your life to prove it isn't saving you, they're erasing you. Real love respects your boundaries, your history, and your ability to choose, even when it hurts. When you grow up with divorced parents who weaponize silence, you learn to treat attention like oxygen. I met Jason when I was 19, shy, working nights at a campus coffee shop, and still flinching whenever a guy's voice rose above a certain volume. He breezed in like he owned the place. Expensive jacket over thrift store jeans, messy hair that obviously took 20 minutes, smile that could probably talk its way out of a crime. He ordered a black coffee and asked my name, then used it in every sentence like a charm. "So, Emma, are you always this serious? Emma, do you ever stop thinking?" Nobody had ever spoken to me like I was the only person in the room. My friends called him a walking red flag. I called him the first boy who ever made me feel like a main character. We fell into a relationship fast, the way insecure people do with charming ones. He showed up outside my dorm with takeout and playlists. He introduced me to older friends who worked in consulting and real estate, guys who always met us in loud bars, who joked about clients like they were prey. Jason was protective in ways that felt flattering at first. He'd walk me home, wait outside my classes, delete guys' numbers from my phone in front of me. He banned me from talking to my ex. "I just know how men think," he'd say. "I'm keeping you safe." It took me a long time to realize he wasn't guarding me from other men. He was making sure no one could warn me about him. He told me I was his first real love. He said this right before he asked me to move in, right before he started borrowing money just until Friday, right before he got me to co-sign on a car, because my credit is crap, babe. My parents screwed me. Every time I hesitated, he'd flip a switch. Eyes wet, voice soft. "Everyone leaves me eventually. You're not like them, are you?" When I pushed back harder, he'd get mean. "You like being poor? You like being ordinary?" It was a cycle. Love bomb, guilt, insult, apology sex, repeat. If you've never been in that kind of relationship, it sounds obvious. Inside it, though, it just feels like trying not to drop any of the plates he keeps handing you. A year in, he surprised me with a weekend away at an eco-retreat, a few hours from the city. "We need to reconnect," he said. "No phones, no noise, just us." I was exhausted, broke, and constantly on edge, but the idea of him wanting to fix things sucker-punched me with hope. We drove out on a Friday afternoon, hours into increasingly rural backroads, until the radio turned to static and my phone lost signal. The retreat turned out to be a cluster of cabins in the woods, no other cars in the gravel lot, a hand-painted sign, "Serenity Haven, Tech-Free Healing." A woman in her 50s greeted us, smile too wide, eyes not reaching it. "You must be Jason," she said, hugging him like they'd met before. "And this is the one?" The one. I noticed the wording, filed it away. Inside the cabin, there were 2 twin beds pushed apart, a Bible on the nightstand, a printed list of rules for spiritual safety pinned on the wall. No phones, no meat, no leaving the grounds without permission. I laughed, thinking it was cheesy branding, and asked Jason if this was some kind of cult. He kissed my forehead, said, "Relax, Em. It's just a place I went to once when I was really messed up. They helped me. They'll help us." When I asked when that was, who they were, he changed the subject and unpacked like we were staying a month instead of 2 nights. The first strange thing happened at dinner. We were led to a communal hall where a dozen or so people sat silently, eating soup and bread. The woman from check-in, who introduced herself as Judith, spiritual caretaker, said, "Everyone, this is Jason and Emma. He's brought her here to do the work." Several heads turned, some pitying, some flat. One man, early 30s, tired face, mouthed, "Leave," very clearly at me, when Judith had her back turned. Jason squeezed my knee under the table hard enough to bruise. Later, when I asked him if he saw that, he said, "You're so paranoid. This is exactly why you need this place." That night, Judith took our phones for safekeeping, locking them in a wooden box. "We find it's easier to get honest without distractions," she said. When I joked about needing mine for Instagram, she didn't even smile. Jason pulled me aside after and said, "Please, Em, just try. For me." It was the "for me" that got me. I kept noticing little things, though. The way the other guests avoided my eyes. The faded photos on the wall. Couples smiling in front of the same dining hall door. Sometimes with Jason in the background, arm around a different woman each time. In one, he was barely older than me when we met, holding a blonde I'd never seen before like she was his entire world. The caption read, "Step 5, Surrendering Ego." I confronted him that second night. "You've been here with someone else," I said, shoving one of the frames at him. His face went blank for a second like a mask taken off. Then he chuckled. "Of course I have, Emma. I told you they helped me. You think your boyfriend didn't have a past?" I pointed at the woman in the photo. "Where is she now?" I asked. Silence. He stared at me for a long time before saying, "She couldn't commit. She left before the work really started." His tone made my skin crawl. That night when I couldn't sleep, I heard arguing downstairs. Jason's voice, low and tense, Judith's cutting through. "She's resistant. He always picks the resistant ones." The next morning, we weren't allowed to leave our cabin until Judith knocked and told us it was time for individual sessions. Jason went first. He walked out with her, kissed me on the top of my head. "Don't overthink," he said. "This is going to fix everything." Hours passed. No one came for me. When I finally opened the door, the compound felt wrong. Too quiet, too expectant. I headed for the dining hall, then stopped. The door to the basement, one I hadn't noticed before, was slightly ajar. Voices floated up. "She's young," Judith was saying. "You can get 3, maybe 4 years out of this one." Jason laughed. "If she doesn't run her mouth." A chair scraped. "Did you get rid of the last one?" he asked. Judith's answer was too soft for me to hear. My feet felt rooted to the floor. I don't remember deciding to go down there. I remember the smell. Bleach and something coppery. The concrete floor. Mattresses lined up against the wall, straps still dangling from their corners. A metal table with paperwork. Names, dates, bank balances, notes like parents retired, own home, no close friends, history of anxiety. My name was on one of the files, thick with fresh pages. Attached was a printed email from my account that I didn't remember sending, titled Emergency, addressed to my mother, explaining I was checking into a treatment center for a while and might not be reachable. It ended. "Please trust Jason. He knows what's best." My stomach turned. On a shelf were photos. Jason with girl after girl after girl, all in this same compound, all smiling stiffly. More recent ones showed no girls at all. Just him, older, Judith at his side, both wearing identical pendants. I flipped one over. On the back, in neat handwriting, "First love is the easiest to break." I heard footsteps above me and grabbed the sharpest thing I could find, a broken piece of shelving. When the basement door opened, I was halfway up the stairs. Jason's face appeared, smiling like he'd caught me sneaking dessert. "Hey babe, was just coming to get you." I hit him. Hard, right across the eyebrow. He screamed, more in anger than pain, and I bolted. I don't remember the path through the woods. I remember branches clawing at my arms, my bare feet slamming rocks. Judith's voice behind me shouting things about ungratefulness and wasting an opportunity. Eventually, I reached a road and flagged down a trucker who took one look at my face and bleeding feet, shoved his phone into my hands and said, "Call whoever you have to." The police were complicated. They called Serenity Haven a therapeutic community with unorthodox practices. Jason claimed I was having a mental health episode and had misinterpreted everything. Without the basement still prepped, without the other girls, it became my word against his. The file with my email disappeared. I got my phone back, wiped clean. The old photos in the dining hall were gone when detectives went back. I did eventually press charges, not for attempted murder or human trafficking or whatever my nightmares insist it was, but for identity theft and fraud. When I found out he'd taken out a credit card in my name during our relationship, he got probation. He moved states. Our mutual friends told me I was overreacting, that he was trying to get better. Sometimes someone sends me a screenshot of his dating profile. Jason, 31, looking for my first real love. No drama. The comments are full of heart emojis. I'm a 39-year-old woman, and if you type my name into Google, you won't find anything interesting. That's probably for the best. The most important thing that's ever happened to me lives somewhere between a private horror story and a long, slow lesson in how easy it is to lose yourself when someone else is busy rewriting you. For context, I'm a trauma counselor. I work with people who have survived things no one should have to. I have degrees, training, supervision. I know the language of manipulation, gaslighting, love bombing. I teach people how to spot it. And yet, a few years ago, I walked straight into it like every textbook warning had been printed in invisible ink. I met him through a professional networking group, one of those mental health practitioners' discussion spaces. He called himself Leo, said he was a psychiatric nurse working nights in a city hospital. He had that casual, competent energy people in emergency services often do. Dry jokes, a low tolerance for bullshit, a soft spot for underdogs. We started by debating some article about complex PTSD. He argued that most of psychiatry was just pharmaceutical sales with Latin words, and I laughed more than I should have. He was sharp, quick, and didn't defer to me just because I was more academically qualified. It felt refreshing. I'd been divorced for 3 years at that point, and my dating life was a graveyard of men who either wanted a therapist or a mother. Leo seemed like neither. We moved to private messages. His story was simple and tragic in the right proportion. Abusive childhood, self-educated, worked his way up in healthcare. Divorced, no kids, a line of toxic exes who couldn't handle his long hours and messed up brain. He showed me scars on his arms from past self-harm, the evidence of his own demons. It made me soften toward him in a way that bypassed all my usual caution. I told myself I understood this territory. Wounded people understand wounded people. He told me he hadn't felt this seen in years, that I'd decoded him in weeks in ways his ex had never managed in 2 years. When you spend your working life decoding people for a living, it's intoxicating to hear someone frame that as love instead of labor. Our first in-person date felt like I'd stepped into a room with someone I'd known for years. He was tall, smaller in presence than in text, but his attention was like a spotlight. "You do that thing with your hands when you're excited," he said, imitating my gesture mid-sentence. I hadn't even realized I did that. "You over-explain when you're scared I'll misunderstand you," he added almost gently. "I like it. Makes me feel how much you care about words. When someone mirrors you that precisely, it can feel like intimacy." In reality, he was taking inventory. All the small tells of my insecurity, cataloged with clinical precision. He never interrupted me, never checked his phone. I left the bar feeling high, like my nervous system had just been wrapped in warm cotton. The darkness didn't announce itself with screaming or cheating, at least not at first. It seeped in through small, offhand remarks. "You know you talk to me differently than you talk to your friends, right?" he'd say after overhearing a call. "You're softer with me. That's the real you." Or, "I don't think your supervisor really gets you. She wants you to fit into boxes, but you're beyond that." He positioned himself as the only one who truly saw me, and everyone else in my life as slightly lacking, slightly clueless. When I'd have a disagreement with a friend, he'd say, "I could have predicted that. You always pick people who can't handle your intensity." It sounded like insight, but what it really did was erode my trust in my own network, one tiny chip at a time. A few months in, he started talking about a woman named Laura. She was a patient, he said. Later, a former patient. The description was slippery. "She reminds me of you," he'd tell me over dinner. Smart, complicated, a bit too much for most people. The comparison flattered me at first. I asked ordinary clinical questions. "Is it appropriate for you to talk about her like this?" He'd roll his eyes. "You therapists are so bound up in rules. I'm just venting. I don't name her. I'm not violating anything." The more he talked about her, the more I noticed the overlaps. She was afraid of abandonment. She hated loud bars. She couldn't handle people raising their voices. All things I'd told him about myself, now attributed to this invisible woman I'd never meet. I told myself it was transference, that he was using our dynamic to process his work. I was wrong. The cheating was not physical, not that I know of. It was something stranger, and to me, more horrifying. One night, when he thought I was asleep on his couch, he had his laptop open. The sound of my own name made my eyes snap open. He was on some forum for trauma survivors under a pseudonym telling his story. Except it wasn't his. It was mine, spliced with details I'd told him in confidence, adjusted just enough that he could plausibly deny it was about me if confronted. My father's drinking problem shifted to an uncle. My teenage panic attacks moved into his supposed adolescence. He was hoovering up my history, remixing it into narratives where he was the central victim. People flooded him with sympathy. "You're so strong. You deserve love." He responded with lines he'd once said to me. "I'm just trying to find someone who can hold my darkness without dropping it." It didn't stop there. I began to notice phrases I'd coined in therapy sessions show up in his messages to online strangers. I'd call a boundary, a kindness to your future self. Weeks later, I'd see him write to some woman on Twitter, "Set a boundary. It's a kindness to your future self." This was more than borrowing. It was identity theft on a psychological level. He wasn't just cheating on me with other women. He was cheating using parts of me. My metaphors, my analysis, my self-disclosures, all stripped of context and repackaged to make him look profound, supportive, endlessly understanding. He was building a better version of himself out of my insides. The stalking didn't begin at the front door. It started in my mind. "You disappeared for 6 minutes between those 2 texts earlier," he said once. "Who were you talking to?" I laughed it off until I realized he genuinely tracked my typing patterns. "You take longer to reply when you're with that colleague of yours, the blonde one. Your sentences get shorter. It's like you're editing yourself, so I can't tell who you're with. You don't have to do that with me." There was always that twist. Accusation dressed as concern. He'd say, "I worry sometimes that you're not fully honest. Not because you're a liar, but because you're scared. I wish you trusted me like I trust you." I started sharing more, over-explaining my whereabouts, my conversations, my feelings. He'd created the insecurity and then offered himself as the cure. The first time I tried to pull away, he got sick. Not dramatically. Just vague chest pains, panic attacks that would strike when I hadn't answered in an hour. "It started when you said you needed space," he told me. "My therapist says it might be abandonment trauma. It's fine, I'll deal with it. Don't let my broken brain control your choices." That sentence was a masterpiece. It blamed me without blaming me. It told me I was literally making him ill while simultaneously praising my independence. I stayed. Of course I did. I spent my days coaxing people not to internalize guilt for others' reactions. It was perversely easy to fail to extend that compassion to myself. The real break came from a woman I only know as Kay. She emailed me using my work address, subject line, "You don't know me, but you need to read this." She told me she'd been in an online support group for ex-partners of narcissists. Someone had shared screenshots of a man named Leo, who'd been love-bombing her, using highly specific therapeutic language and telling a story about his history with a cold intellectual ex who weaponized psychology against him. The phrases rang a bell for her. They rang a bell for me too, when she attached them. They were my words. Arguments I'd made to him in private, twisted into accusations about me, shared with another woman as evidence of his perpetual victimhood. He'd cast himself as my wounded patient, me as the cruel clinician who'd pathologized his love, and this new woman as the one who finally understood him. The most unnerving part was that he'd described my bedroom in detail. The color of my sheets, the book on my nightstand, the crack in the ceiling I always stared at when I couldn't sleep. He'd told this other woman that these details came from his shitty ex's place, where he'd cried more nights than he cared to count. He'd taken my most private physical space and turned it into a stage set for his martyrdom. I confronted him, this time not in person, but through a long written message. I laid out everything. The identity theft, the emotional triangulation, the way he used my story as emotional currency with strangers. He replied with a wall of text that might as well have been cut and pasted from a manual on gaslighting. I was projecting. I was pathologizing normal human behavior. I was too stuck in therapist mode to see that real relationships are messy, not clinical. At one point he wrote, "You do realize you're not the only person who's ever said these things to me, right? Maybe you're not as unique as you think." That line gutted me more than the rest. Not because I believed him, but because I realized how many others there must have been. Women who thought they were the first to hear his confessions, the first to be trusted with his trauma, the first to be told, "No one's ever seen me like you do." He was a serial monogamist in narrative, polyamorous in emotional predation. He never abandoned you. He just quietly started rehearsing you in someone else's inbox before you'd even had time to feel him pull away. Leaving him wasn't clean. I blocked him on everything, changed passwords, told my friends and supervisor the full story, so there would be no isolated shame for him to weaponize later. He made 2 attempts to get back in, once via a fake client inquiry at my practice, once via a burner account on the professional forum where we'd met. Both times, his tone was conciliatory, world-weary. "We're both adults. Can't we have a conversation rather than running away?" Both times, I didn't respond. That silence felt less like empowerment and more like holding a shaking glass of water still. I half expected him to show up at my door, to escalate from digital to physical stalking, but he never did. In a way, that was almost worse. It confirmed what my gut had suspected. I was never his main storyline. I was just one of many scripts he ran in parallel. I used to think my first love story was boring. High school sweethearts, shared playlists, prom pictures, the whole cliché. Now I think of it as the first chapter of a horror story. I didn't know I was in yet. My name is Maya. I'm 26 now, and I still flinch when I hear 3 specific words. I remember that. I met Liam when I was 15, and he was the new kid, transferred mid-semester from some expensive private school because his parents wanted him to have a normal experience. He was quiet but funny, with that careful, attentive way of listening that makes you feel like the only person in the room. Everyone thought he was shy. I thought he was kind. I wasn't completely wrong. We started dating after he walked me home in the rain and gave me his jacket textbook movie moment. He noticed everything about me, in a way that felt flattering when you're a teenage girl who thinks invisibility is the default setting. He remembered my test dates, my coffee order, the exact way I liked my hair braided for soccer games. When we fought, he'd text long, articulate apologies, referencing specific times he'd failed me, promising strategies to do better. It sounded suspiciously like therapy language, but neither of us was in therapy then. My friends called him the perfect boyfriend. My mom adored him. I thought I'd marry him. Instead, I broke up with him the summer before college because I'd been accepted to a school 3 states away, and he hadn't, and I didn't want to drag a high school relationship into adult life. He didn't yell or cry when I ended it. He just went very still and asked, "Is there someone else?" I said no, because there wasn't. He nodded and said, "People don't fall out of love. They just get distracted. I'll wait until you remember." I wrote it off as melodramatic. At graduation, he handed me a photo of us at homecoming with "Don't forget" written on the back. I threw all our pictures away when I moved into my freshman dorm. I blocked him on everything. My friends called it a clean break. I thought that meant the past would stay in the past. 8 years later, I moved to Seattle for a new job and a fresh start after another messy breakup. My ex there hadn't been a stalker. He'd just been a liar, cheating, gaslighting, the works. I left that relationship vowing never to ignore my gut again. I found a tiny studio apartment over a laundromat, noisy but cheap. The first weekend after I moved in, I was hauling boxes up the stairs when I heard it. The low, off-key hum of a song I used to fall asleep to. Liam's song, a stupid indie track he put on every mix he made for me. I froze on the landing, box digging into my ribs, listening. The sound drifted up from the alley, then stopped. When I finally looked, nobody was there. Just overflowing dumpsters and a stray cat. I told myself some neighbor just had the same bad taste in music. Weird things started small. A sticky note on my door that said, "You always hated stairs," and handwriting that felt familiar in a way I couldn't place. A coffee cup left on my car hood with my exact oat milk, 1 pump vanilla order written on the side, even though I hadn't told anyone at work my preferences yet. A playlist suggestion popping up on my Spotify titled "For Running in the Rain," containing songs I hadn't listened to since I was 17. I laughed it off, told friends about my mildly creepy universe glitch. They said it sounded like an algorithm thing, targeted ads, digital coincidence. I wanted to believe them. Then came the photo. It was in my mailbox on a Tuesday. No envelope, just a glossy print of me at 16, sitting cross-legged on my bedroom floor in pajamas, hair a mess, studying for finals. I remember that night vividly, because my mom had been yelling at my dad downstairs, and I'd locked myself in my room with headphones. I never posted that photo anywhere. The angle was slightly above eye level, like it was taken from my open door. On the back, in blue ink, someone had written, "I always loved how you looked when you thought no one was watching." I called my mom, hands shaking, and asked if she still had any old photos of me. She said no. I'd thrown the shoebox away before college, remember? I went to the police the first time after I woke up at 3 a.m. to the sound of my shower running. I live alone. I sleep with my bedroom door closed and locked out of habit. I thought maybe a pipe burst, but when I got up, the bathroom light was on, door half open, steam curling into the hall. The shower handle was turned all the way to hot. On the mirror, written in the fog, were the words, "Still jumpy." By the time the officers arrived, the letters had mostly faded. They asked if I had roommates, an ex with a key, any enemies. I said no to all 3. They'd heard of weird neighbor pranks, they said. Probably a one-off. They told me to install better locks and maybe a camera. I did both. The camera caught him 3 nights later. Sort of. At 2:17 a.m., my phone buzzed with a motion alert. I opened the app to see a tall figure standing at my front door, head tilted like he was listening. He didn't knock. He didn't try the handle. He just stood there for exactly 3 minutes and 33 seconds, then leaned close to the lens. The video glitched, a smear of static, and when the feed returned, the porch was empty. No face, no clear image, just the faint muffled sound of that old song humming through the speakers. I took screenshots, sent them to the non-emergency police line. They said they'd add it to the report. A week later, during a late shift at my new job, a coworker named Jenna glanced at my laptop background, a generic stock photo, and joked, "You should use that cute picture of you at the pier." I frowned. I didn't have any pier photos on my work computer. She turned her phone toward me. On her Instagram Explore tab was a suggested post. A grainy shot of me from behind, standing at the end of a wooden pier over a lake I recognized from my hometown. Caption: "Some people never really leave." The account was private, username still remembering. 0 posts visible, 0 followers, 0 following. I went to the bathroom and threw up. The next day I got a friend request from that same account on a long abandoned Facebook profile I hadn't used in years. Most of my old messages were gone. I'd deleted them before college, but some had been archived. Ones I apparently didn't know existed. Threads between me and Liam where he talked about how to keep someone from breaking themselves, about building better attachments, about making sure they always know you're watching out for them. Some messages were written from my account that I swear to God I never wrote. I like how you remember for me. Promise you'll always see me when I can't see myself. Dates and timestamps lined up with nights I remembered crying about my parents' fights, about feeling invisible. I would have given anything then for someone to say, "I see you." I just hadn't realized how literally he meant it. I hired a locksmith, changed my locks again, added a chain, covered the peephole. The locksmith, an older woman who'd clearly seen some things, asked if everything was okay. I almost said bad breakup, but instead I said, "I think someone from my past found me." She nodded slowly and said, "They usually do when they think you're theirs." For the next month, nothing happened. No notes, no humming, no photos. I started to relax. I told myself I'd been paranoid, that it was probably a cluster of coincidences amplified by my anxiety. I started going out with coworkers after shifts, laughing again, flirting with a bartender who gave me free fries. I posted a picture of my drink on a private Instagram story, visible only to close friends. An hour later, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You never liked gin." I hadn't posted what I was drinking, just the glass in my hand. He knew anyway. I froze on the bar stool, heart hammering. I typed back, "Who is this?" The reply came immediately. "Someone who's always paid attention." I didn't respond. He sent another. "You told me you wanted someone who remembered the little things, Maya. You taught me what love is. I'm just giving it back." I blocked the number, walked home with my keys between my fingers, and slept with my shoes on, ready to run. The next morning, every single framed photo in my apartment, me with friends, me with my mom, landscapes I'd taken on trips, was turned face down. Not smashed, not stolen, just flipped. On my fridge, my grocery list was edited in neat, unfamiliar handwriting. Next to milk and eggs, someone had added, "Stop pretending you're alone." I checked the door camera footage. The timeline jumped from 1:02 a.m. to 3:47 a.m. with no warning. Corrupted file. The company said it sometimes happens. The tech on the phone sounded bored. I started sleeping at a friend's place on and off. She believed me, but even belief doesn't stop reality from fraying. The last straw came on a random Thursday. I was at work, mid-shift, when my mom FaceTimed me 3 times in a row. She never does that. When I picked up, she was pale and shaking. "Why would you send me that?" she asked. I had no idea what she meant. She turned her phone camera around to show her laptop screen. An email from my account sat open. Subject line, "I'm safe. Stop worrying." The body of the message said, "You'll probably freak out when I disappear again, so I wanted to reassure you first. I'm with someone who actually sees me. Don't call the police this time." Attached was a photo of my front door, slightly ajar, my sneakers on the mat. Timestamp that morning, 4:03 a.m. I had been asleep at my friend's house then, with her dog snoring against my legs. That night, I drove back to my apartment with Jenna and my friend from work. We packed everything that mattered into boxes and suitcases in under 2 hours. I didn't bother folding anything. On my bed, under the pillow, I found a folded piece of paper. It was a photocopy of an old note from high school, the first time I'd ever told Liam I loved him, in messy teenage handwriting. Across the bottom, in fresh ink, he'd written, "First love is just the version of you that's honest. Everyone else is an edit. I'm only here for the original." I left the paper there and walked out. I moved cities again. New job, new number, total digital cleanup. I hired a professional to audit my online presence, remove old mentions, tighten privacy on everything. I told my mom not to open any emails that looked like they were from me, unless we'd talked first. Therapy became a weekly thing, not just a panicked drop-in. Sometimes I think it's over. Sometimes, like last week, I'll get a random friend suggestion on a platform I barely use. A profile with no picture, no posts, just a first name that feels too familiar, watching from a distance. No messages, no likes, nothing overt. Just proof that he still knows where I am. That he's waiting for the moment I'm lonely enough to mistake surveillance for care again. Your first love can leave fingerprints on your idea of what love should look like, but attention is not the same as safety, and memory is not the same as devotion. If someone insists only they truly see you, while slowly cutting you off from everyone else, that's not romantic. It's a cage. Don't confuse being remembered with being respected. If you feel watched instead of witnessed, listen to that fear, and get out. We lived 3 houses down from each other for 15 years, and that's how I convinced myself I knew him. Mark was the older boy on our street when I was a kid, the one who mowed lawns in summer, shoveled snow in winter, and played basketball with younger kids when no one else could be bothered. To my 12-year-old self, he looked like a movie star. Tall, easy smile, always with an old Walkman hanging from his belt. He once bandaged my knee when I fell off my bike, told me, "You're tougher than you look, Mia." And I replayed that sentence in my head for weeks. When you grow up in a house where your parents mainly talk to each other in sighs and slam doors, any adult who looks you in the eye and says your name becomes a kind of god. By the time I was 17, he was 25, still living at home to save money after a bad business venture. My mom loved him. "Such a nice young man," she'd say whenever he offered to help carry groceries. My dad talked football with him in the driveway. No one thought it was weird when we started hanging out more. "He's just watching out for you," they said, relieved someone else was taking an interest. He gave me rides to school, waited outside my evening shifts at the bookstore, brought me hot chocolate during exams. When I got my heart broken by a boy in my year, Mark sat with me on his porch steps and said, "They don't appreciate you yet. You're special, Mia. You need someone who sees that." Looking back, the boundary lines were there, smudged but visible. The way he'd get angry if I didn't answer his texts immediately. The way he'd subtly insult any male friend my age. "He looks like a little punk. He's just trying to sleep with you, you know that, right?" The way he'd show up outside my school without telling me, leaning against his car, girls in my class whispering, "Is that your boyfriend?" I'd correct them, laugh, say, "He's just a friend." Inside, though, I loved the way they looked at me, like I had something they didn't. That was what he was feeding, not my heart, my ego. On my 18th birthday, my parents threw me a small party in our backyard. Mark came over with a cake from the fancy bakery downtown and a little velvet box. Inside was a silver necklace with a tiny moon charm. "For my favorite girl," he said, in front of everyone. My mom clapped. My dad took a photo. No one flinched at "my" in that sentence. Later, when everyone had gone and I was cleaning up, he helped stack chairs. "You look beautiful tonight," he said, standing a little too close. I laughed it off. "I look like a kid," I said. He shook his head. "You're not a kid anymore. That's the problem." My skin prickled. I told myself I was imagining it. A few months later, I got into a university 2 hours away. I cried when the acceptance email came, from relief more than joy. Mark was the first person I told. He hugged me, picked me up, spun me around. "This is huge," he said. That night he texted, "We need to celebrate properly. Just us, no parents." I agreed because that's what I did. He suggested a weekend away before school started. "There's this cabin my uncle owns by the lake," he said. "Super quiet. We can fish, talk. You can clear your head before the big move." My parents, unbelievably, thought this was adorable. "It's so nice he still wants to hang out with you," my mom said. My dad clapped him on the back. "Watch out for my girl," he joked. Nobody considered that maybe he already was, just in the wrong way. We drove up on a Friday afternoon. The lake was small, ringed with trees, more swamp than postcard. The cabin was old but clean, 2 small bedrooms, 1 bathroom that smelled faintly of mildew. No cell service. "It's only 2 days," I told myself when a knot formed in my gut. Mark was chatty on the drive, asking about my class schedule, whether I'd met any boys on the orientation group chat, if there were co-ed dorms. When I said yes, he went quiet for a moment, then smirked. "Well, I guess you'll be busy." The joke landed wrong. I changed the subject. That first night, we sat on the porch, beer bottles sweating on the railing, listening to crickets and the occasional splash from the lake. At some point, he asked, "Do you remember when you were 13 and you ran away down the block? You only made it to the park." I laughed. "Yeah, you found me." He nodded. "Your dad called me in a panic. We looked everywhere on the street. I knew you'd go to the park. You always go there when you're upset." I smiled, warmed by the idea that he'd known me so well, even then. "You've always been my favorite," he added, voice low. "Since you were a kid. I always said, I'm waiting for that one to grow up." The words slid into my stomach like ice. I told myself again that I was overreacting. Later, when I went to bed, I noticed my duffel bag felt lighter. My phone, which I'd left plugged in, was gone. So was my car key. I told myself I'd misplaced them. I told myself a lot of things before finally going to his room. He was sitting on the edge of the bed, fully dressed, as if he'd been waiting. My phone lay on the nightstand beside him. My key dangled from his finger. "Looking for these?" he asked, smiling in a way that didn't reach his eyes. My whole body went cold. "Why do you have those?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He patted the bed beside him. "Sit. We need to talk." I didn't sit. He sighed. "You're making this harder than it has to be, Mia." He stood slowly, pocketed the key. "You're leaving," he said. "You're going to go to some stupid university, meet some idiot boy, and forget about me. After everything I've done for you. After all these years." His voice rose. "Do you have any idea how long I've waited? Do you think I spent my 20s babysitting you because I'm just a nice guy?" My mind raced. The front door. The car. No phone. No key. No signal. We were miles from the main road. He stepped closer, dropped his tone. "I know you better than anyone. I've watched you since you were a kid. I know when you're lying, so don't lie to me now." Something in me snapped then. Not courage, just clarity. "Give me my stuff," I said, heart pounding. "You're scaring me." He blinked as if offended. "Scaring you?" He laughed once, sharp. "You don't get it. Out there, you're just another girl. Here, you're mine." I bolted. Instinct more than decision. I made it to the front door before he grabbed me by the arm so hard I felt something pull. He shoved me against the wall, face an inch from mine. His eyes were wet, wild. "Don't make me do something we'll both regret," he said. "Just stay. Just for a while. You'll see. It's better here. No one leaves me. Not you." I did something stupid then. I started talking to him like he was one of the kids at the bookstore who had tantrums. Okay, I said, hands up. "I won't go. I'll stay. Just..." Let me go to the bathroom first, please. He stared at me, searching my face for a lie. Years of training under his watch paid off. I knew how to make my voice small, my eyes soft. Eventually, he let go. "Don't lock the door," he said. "I don't like doors between us." My hands shook so hard I had trouble turning the handle. The bathroom had a tiny window above the shower, barely big enough for a child. The lock was old, rusted. I climbed onto the toilet, pushed. It didn't budge. Outside, he paced the hallway, muttering. I could hear him talking to himself. "She doesn't know what she's doing. She's just scared. You're doing this for her. She needs you." I recognized the tone. I'd used it on myself every time he crossed a line for the last 6 years. I pushed again. The window groaned, then snapped open. I squeezed through, scraping my hips and shoulders, dropped onto damp grass, and ran. I don't remember much about the woods, just branches tearing my skin and the sound of him yelling my name, first angry, then pleading, then furious again. "Mia, you're overreacting. Come back." He kept saying "we," like there was still a we. I hit the roadside barefoot, flagged down a passing car, and threw myself in front of it so they had to stop. An older couple took one look at me, bleeding, wild-eyed, and pulled me inside, locked the doors, handed me a phone. When the police arrived at the cabin, Mark was sitting on the porch, drinking a beer, acting confused. "She just freaked out," he said. "She's always been dramatic." Everyone wanted to minimize it. "He didn't touch you," they said. "He was just emotional." My parents were torn between horror and defensiveness. "We knew him," my mom kept repeating, as if that meant anything. He was charged with unlawful restraint and tampering with a vehicle, pled down to something smaller. He got counseling. I got nightmares. The worst part was hearing the neighbors talk. He was always so nice. He must have been in love. As if that explained locking up an 18-year-old girl in a cabin to keep her from leaving. A year later, I got a message request on social media from a teenage girl whose profile picture showed my old street in the background. "Hey," it read, "you don't know me, but Mark talks about you all the time, says you made up the stuff about him, just wanted you to know you ruined his life. He said you used to flirt with him when you were like 14. That's messed up." I blocked her. Then I blocked my hometown in my mind. I moved. I changed my hair. I learned what red flags actually look like up close. Back when I was 22, I thought first love meant something pure. I was working nights at a warehouse, saving money to move out of my parents' place, while most of my friends were already in relationships, moving in together, getting engaged. I felt behind. So when I matched with Hannah on a dating app, I ignored all the little warning signs because I was starving for connection. Her profile said things like, "Done with boys, ready for a real man," and "If you're not obsessed with me, we won't work." I thought it was just sassy confidence. She messaged first, told me I had kind eyes, and within a week she was calling me babe and saying stuff like, "I don't know why, I just feel safe with you. I've never had that before." It hit every lonely spot in me I didn't know how to admit I had. Our first date was at a quiet bar near my work. She was even prettier in person. Big brown eyes, oversized hoodie, messy bun. She ordered a drink, leaned in close, and said, "Tell me something you've never told anyone." I laughed it off at first, but she stayed locked in, waiting. I ended up telling her about my dad's drinking when I was a kid, how I'd started working early just to have an excuse to be out of the house. She took my hand across the table and whispered, "You deserved so much better than that. I'll never hurt you like that." Nobody had ever said something like that to me so directly. By the end of the night, she'd asked if she could come to my place to keep talking. I said yes, because of course I did. We didn't sleep together that night, but she did fall asleep with her head on my chest like we'd been together for years. Within 2 weeks, she was basically living at my place. She moved a toothbrush in, then a drawer of clothes, then half my wardrobe became ours. It felt fast, but she framed it as fate. When you know, you know. I'm not going to pretend I don't love you, she said one night while we ate instant noodles on my couch. Love? After 2 weeks? I laughed nervously and she frowned, then went quiet. Later she said, "You didn't say it back. Are you not serious about me?" I panicked and told her I just wasn't good with emotions. She smiled, kissed me, and murmured, "It's okay. I'll teach you how to love." I told myself it was intense because we were meant to be. Truth was, I was already scared of upsetting her. The controlling stuff started so slowly I almost missed it. First, it was her asking who I was texting. Then it was little digs about my female coworkers. "She seems too touchy. I don't like her." Then she started saying things like, "Your friends are bad for your mental health. They don't get you like I do. When you're with them, you come back weird with me." If I mentioned grabbing a beer with the guys after work, she'd get teary. "It's fine, go. I'll just be here alone, trying not to spiral." So I stayed home more. When my best friend texted, "Dude, we never see you anymore. You good?" I said, "Yeah, just busy." I wasn't busy. I was being slowly isolated by someone who insisted it was love. The first time we fought, it was over nothing. I'd forgotten to answer a text because I was on a forklift. I came back to my phone at break and had 15 missed calls and messages like, "Where are you? Who are you with? So this is how it is." When I called, she answered on the first ring, already crying. "You just disappear. My ex used to do that when he was cheating. I can't go through that again." I apologized so many times I lost count, promising to text even on the toilet if that's what she needed. "I'm just scared of losing you," she sniffed. "You're my first real love. Don't make me feel crazy." She said crazy like it was a joke, but it didn't feel like one when she immediately demanded my phone password, so we never have to doubt each other again. Once she had my password, the tone changed. She'd casually wave my phone at me and say, "You forgot to tell me Mark messaged you." As if that was normal. If a coworker commented on a social media post, she'd scroll through their pictures and say things like, "So you like girls who post bikini pics, huh?" And then pick a fight. Sex started to feel like a transaction. If I reassured her enough, if I told her she was the only woman I found attractive, if I let her mold me into something she thought she could trust, then I'd be rewarded with affection. If not, she'd withdraw and accuse me of emotionally abandoning her. I started saying and doing things I didn't mean, just to keep the peace. The manipulation got darker when she started talking about her past. At first it was to build intimacy. She'd say, "Every guy I've been with cheated or hit me. You're my last chance. If this doesn't work, I'm done." That's a terrifying thing to hear when you're 22 and already feel responsible for everyone's feelings. Sometimes she'd offhandedly mention knowing where her exes worked, or how she'd only lost it because they pushed her too far. When I asked what lost it meant, she shrugged. Nothing illegal, just made sure they remembered me. It was meant as a joke, but there was a flatness in her eyes when she said it that stuck with me. The cheating was what finally ripped the blinders off. It started with small weirdnesses, her taking her phone to the bathroom, suddenly having girls' nights with friends I'd never heard of, locking her screen when I walked by. Every time I asked, she'd flip it around on me. "Wow, so you don't trust me? After everything I've told you?" Or she'd start an argument so big and emotional that the original question got lost. One night, at around midnight, she said she needed to clear her head and went for a walk. I watched her from the window. She didn't walk anywhere. A car pulled up. She got in without looking back. She came home at 3 a.m., smelling like men's cologne and smoke, climbed into bed and whispered, "You're the only safe place I have." I didn't sleep a second. A sane person would have walked out then. I confronted her instead. I asked directly who picked her up. She looked me dead in the eye and said, "You're paranoid. I jog at night. Can I not have one thing that's just for me?" When I told her I'd seen the car, her whole expression changed. Gone was the soft victim, and in its place something cold and calculating. "So, You're spying on me now? She snapped. I should have known you were just like the rest. You made me open up and now you want to control me? I remember standing there actually doubting my own eyes because she said it with such conviction. Then my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. Tell your girl to stop giving out my car as an Uber. I'm not her driver. Attached was a photo of Hannah leaning through the car window, kissing some guy. I showed her the message. She didn't apologize. She didn't even flinch. Instead, she laughed, this quiet, humorless laugh, and said, So? We weren't official anyway. We'd been living together for 4 months. She'd been calling me her boyfriend to everyone, posting photos of us with captions like, My forever. When I said that, she rolled her eyes. Online labels don't mean anything. You're so literal. It's boring. I needed attention. You weren't giving it to me. The truth was, I had no idea what I was supposed to give that would have ever been enough. I felt this bizarre mix of heartbreak and relief. I wasn't crazy. Something really was wrong here, and it wasn't me. Leaving wasn't dramatic. It was painfully small and pathetic. I waited until she left for a study group and packed what I could into 2 trash bags. I left my own TV, my own gaming console, a couch I'd bought secondhand, because I just wanted out. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely lock the door. I texted her one sentence. I'm done. Don't contact me again. She didn't reply for a day. Then the flood started. You're abandoning me. You promised you were different. Don't make me show everyone what you're really like. Then the threats escalated. She told my friends I was controlling and had anger issues, hinted to my mother that I'd hit her, I never had, and messaged every woman who interacted with me online saying, Be careful, he's abusive. The projection would have been funny if it wasn't so dangerous. For about 3 months, I lived in constant fear she'd show up at my work or tell a story that would stick. I changed my number, locked down all my social media, told my boss and close friends everything so nothing could blindside them. Slowly, the noise died down. She moved on to someone else, evident from a mutual friend's post about Hannah's new man who finally treated her right. I clicked his profile once, saw a familiar pattern. Soft, quiet guy, trauma in his past, already posting about how he'd never loved like this before after a month, and closed it. I wanted to warn him, but I also remembered how I'd clung to her when people tried to warn me. Years later, I still flinch when someone says, You're my everything too soon. I've done therapy, sat in rooms where professionals patiently unpacked how someone can weaponize their pain and call it love. I don't hate Hannah. I hate who I let myself become around her. Someone who ignored his own instincts just to avoid being alone. Someone who thought being needed was the same thing as being loved. I used to think horror meant jump scares and haunted houses. Then I met Daniel and learned that the scariest things don't rattle chains or move furniture. They text you at 3 a.m., memorize your schedule, and tell you you're meant for each other after a single date. The first time I saw him was in a campus cafe, sitting alone with a notebook and a black coffee, too pale for someone his age. He watched people like he was studying them, but when our eyes met, he smiled, and it was surprisingly warm. Later that week, he approached me outside the library and said, I've seen you here a few times. You're always reading the same kind of books as me. Thought I'd finally say hi. It was flattering. Most guys I'd met at uni tried to impress me. He made it sound like he already knew me. Our first conversation lasted 2 hours. He asked weirdly specific questions. Do you dream in color? Are you afraid of dying? Have you ever felt like you've lived this life before? I thought he was just a pretentious philosophy major, but I was bored and he listened like every word I said mattered. He told me he studied psychology and parapsychology online, that he'd always been sensitive. When I asked what that meant, he leaned in and whispered, I see things sometimes. Patterns, people's auras. You have a lot of pain around you, but you're very strong. It's like you're lit up. I wanted to roll my eyes, but it cut too close to the truth of some trauma I hadn't really dealt with. For the first time, someone framed that pain as interesting, almost noble. It felt good in a way that made me uneasy. He asked me out before we parted ways. "Just coffee. I'd like to hear more about you," he said, phrasing it like I'd be doing him a favor by letting him listen. It felt safer than the usual, "let me impress you" routine. On our first official date, he was almost old-fashioned. Opened doors, pulled out my chair, remembered tiny details I'd mentioned days before. In between, he said eerie things with complete sincerity. When I joked about my clumsiness, he said, "It's because your energy is too big for your body. Spirits like that. You attract weird things, you know." Then he added softly, "That's why I noticed you." If someone else had said that, I would have laughed. From him, it felt like a diagnosis. At the end of the night, on a quiet street, he cupped my face and said, "I feel like I've known you forever." I pulled back a bit and said, "We literally just met." He smiled, almost sadly. Some people take years to feel what I feel right now. I guess I'm just cursed with clarity. It should have been a red flag. Instead, I felt special, chosen in some strange spiritual way. When I told him I wasn't ready for anything physical yet, he immediately said, "Of course not. I'd never rush you. That's what they did to you before, isn't it?" I hadn't told him about my previous relationship. My chest tightened. "How did you know that?" He shrugged. "I noticed things. I dream too." I told myself he was just a good guesser. The obsession began quietly. A good morning text at 7 a.m. every day. A good night at midnight. Little check-ins between lectures. At first it was sweet. Then the tone shifted. If I didn't reply within 10 minutes, I'd get, "You disappeared. Are you okay?" At 15 minutes, "Did I say something wrong?" At 30, "Please don't abandon me. I just need to know where you are." The day I left my phone in my bag during a 3-hour lab, I came out to 23 missed calls and an inbox full of messages ranging from pleading to accusing. "Why are you doing this? I thought you were different. I can't believe I opened up to you and you vanish." It felt less like concern, more like someone frantically shaking a cage. When I told him this was too much, he switched gears so fast it was dizzying. "I'm sorry," he said in a small voice. "I've lost a lot. My brain goes to dark places. When you don't answer, I see you dead on the road." He looked genuinely distressed, voice trembling. Then he added, "I know it's not fair to put that on you. I feel you so strongly. Like we're connected. Do you ever get that?" It was hard to argue with someone describing their anxiety while their hands shook on their coffee cup. I softened. "I get anxious too, but you have to respect my space," I said. He nodded like a chastened child. "I'll try. Just, if you can't reply, tell me you can't. Silent hours are like hell to me. It got darker when he started mentioning signs. One night, after I'd gone out with friends and ignored my phone for a few hours, he sent, "A glass shattered in my sink when you left." My room went cold. I knew something bad was happening. When I saw that at 2 a.m., I felt this small, irrational spike of guilt, like my absence had literally cracked his world. Another time, I turned up late to meet him and he said, "I knew you were close. The lights flickered in my hallway. They always do when you're near." I tried to laugh it off. "You think I control the electricity now?" He just looked at me very seriously and said, "Don't pretend you don't feel it too. You're haunted. That's why I was drawn to you. I'm supposed to help you." It was framed like a rescue, but it felt like being studied. I tried to break things off a month in. I told him gently that I wasn't in a place for a relationship and that I felt overwhelmed. His face went blank for a moment, and then he smiled. Too wide, too quick. "Oh, is this a test?" he asked. To see if I'll abandon you like the others? I said no. I meant it. The smile melted into tears, fast. He grabbed my hand across the cafe table and whispered, "You can't. I've seen what happens if you walk away. I had a dream about it. There was blood. Please, don't make that real." The words hit me like a cold wave. It sounded like a threat wrapped in desperation. I froze. People were around us. He was crying, saying, "You're scaring me," felt cruel in that moment. I backed down, said maybe we should go slower instead. His tears stopped almost instantly, like someone had flicked a switch. As the semester went on, my world quietly shrank. He started dropping by everywhere I went. The library, the cafe where I worked, even the grocery store. If I said it was a coincidence, he'd grin and say, "Maybe we're just on the same wavelength." But the timing was too precise, too often. Once, I slipped into a building I'd never mentioned to him for an extra study session and got a text as I sat down. "You look tired, you should eat." I looked out the window and saw him across the courtyard, staring up at the same floor I was on. He didn't wave. He just turned and walked away. The paranormal angle was how he normalized his stalking. If I called out how often he appeared, he'd say, "When you think about someone this much, you just end up in the same places. The universe pulls us together." When I told him I needed a few days without seeing him, he'd reply, "I tried, but every time I shut my eyes, I see you in danger. You can call it crazy, but I've been right before. My grandmother used to say we're touched. We feel death before it happens." He started casually referencing people in his past who died suddenly. An uncle, a neighbor, and implying he'd felt something off just before they passed. The subtext was clear. If I ignored his warnings, if I stepped out of the orbit he'd built, something terrible might happen, and he would have seen it coming. I began having nightmares. In them, I'd be walking home and feel watched. I'd turn, see no one. But lights would flicker in hallways, my phone would buzz with unknown numbers, and a voice I recognized would whisper, "I told you I'd always find you." I'd wake up, heart hammering, and see 3 missed calls from him in the middle of the night. When I asked why he kept calling so late, he said, "I always wake up at 3:15 when your energy spikes. That's when the veil is thinnest. That's when spirits are loudest. I just need to hear your voice to know you're still here." It was such a perfect fusion of superstition and emotional blackmail that I started keeping my phone on silent in another room, just to pretend he wasn't constantly reaching across whatever veil he believed in. The breaking point came on a rainy Tuesday. I'd intentionally gone to a campus cafe on the opposite side of the university where I'd never seen him. I sat facing the door out of habit. 20 minutes in, he walked through it. Our eyes met. He smiled, small and tired, like he'd just finished a long search. He walked over without ordering anything, sat down opposite me, and said quietly, "You've been avoiding me." I could feel people around us, the clink of cups, the hum of conversation. It all felt far away. "Yes," I said finally. "I have. I don't feel safe around you anymore." His eyebrow twitched. He folded his hands, too calm. "Safe? From what? I've never laid a finger on you." His voice was soft, reasonable. That scared me more than if he'd yelled. I told him about the constant texts, the coincidental appearances, the way he used dreams and signs to justify never giving me space. I told him I needed him to stop contacting me completely. He watched my face like he was tracking micro-expressions for a study. Then he leaned back and said, "You're making a mistake." I said, "Maybe, but it's my mistake to make." His eyes went flat. No hurt, no tears, just this distant calculation. "You're not like them," he said. "You're not allowed to abandon me. I know what you are. I've seen it." I stood up, hands shaking, and said, "This conversation is over. He didn't try to grab me. He just said, in a voice barely above a whisper, "You'll see me again. When something breaks." That's when I always show up. I went straight to campus security that day. I showed them the hundreds of messages, the call logs, explained how he always seemed to know where I was. The officer glanced through my phone and said, "Most of this isn't explicitly threatening, but the pattern is concerning. We can make a note, and if he shows up where he shouldn't, call us immediately." It didn't feel like much, but saying it out loud shifted something in me. This wasn't some tragic, romantic obsession. It was stalking. It was someone using my empathy and my curiosity about weird things to pull me into a nightmare dressed up as destiny. I blocked his number, his social media, told my coworkers and roommates what was going on. For a while, it was quiet. Then the emails started from throwaway accounts. "You can't block the bond we have. I dreamed of you again. There was snow and sirens. You don't understand what you're running from." They weren't constant, but they were precise. Always after a big exam, or after a bad day I'd posted about vaguely online. It felt like he was watching the edges of my life, only slipping in when I was weakest. I reported each email. The IT department helped block them as they appeared. Eventually they stopped. About a year later, a girl in one of my seminars mentioned a weird guy who'd freaked her out. She said he'd talked as if he'd known her forever, asked about her dreams, and told her he felt death around her. My blood ran cold. I asked his name. When she said Daniel, my mouth went dry. I told her everything. Every sign I'd ignored, every excuse I'd made for him, every time he'd used ghosts and fate and energy to make me feel like he belonged in every corner of my life. She stared at me, eyes wide, then took out her phone and deleted his number in front of me. We walked to security together that afternoon. I still don't know if Daniel believes the things he says, or if he just found a convincing mythology to wrap around his need for control. That's what makes him so frightening, even in memory. There's no exorcism for people who turn your own fears and fascinations against you. There's only distance, documentation, boundaries so firm they feel cruel, and the willingness to look at someone crying in front of you and still say, "No, I don't owe you access to me." Not all deep connections are real. Some are carefully constructed traps. Anyone who uses fear, of death, of loneliness, of being special, to excuse violating your boundaries isn't spiritual or sensitive. They're dangerous. Protect your space, trust patterns more than words, and remember that you never have to stay just because someone tells you the universe wants you to. I met Claire in my last year of college, when my life was basically group projects, cheap beer, and the constant dread of unpaid internships. She was the kind of girl guys wrote bad poetry about. Green eyes, messy dark hair, boots in every season, and a way of listening to you like you were confessing something sacred. We started as partners in a media ethics class and slid into dating so naturally, I didn't even notice where studying together ended and staying over began. She knew I grew up poor, knew I was terrified of becoming my father, bored, broke, and stuck. She'd touch the back of my neck and say, "You and me, we're going to get out of here. We're going to see everything." I believed her because I needed to. Your first real love feels like the opposite of a scam. You never suspect it might be the biggest con of your life. 3 years later, after graduation and a slog of low-pay office jobs, we were still together, still in the same cramped city, but barely talking. We fought about everything: money, my hours, her freelance work that never had any details, the way she'd turn her phone screen away when texts came in. Any other guy with self-respect would have walked away, but Claire knew exactly which buttons to press to keep me. On the worst nights, when I threatened to leave, she'd start shaking and whisper, "Don't you dare abandon me like he did," referring to her deadbeat father. Sometimes, she'd cry until she threw up, then clean herself up and climb into my lap like nothing had happened. She turned her trauma into a leash and I wore it proudly, convinced I was saving her. One night, after a week of particularly bad arguments, she came home buzzing with excitement, waving her laptop. "Look," she said, shoving it toward me. It was a listing for a villa in rural Italy. Tuscany, of course. Stone walls, pool, cypress trees, the stuff of Pinterest boards. "A client of mine canceled last minute," she said. "I can get it for almost nothing. 10 days, just us. We need this, babe. We're rotting here." I laughed in her face at first. We were 2 months behind on rent. My credit cards were maxed. But she was relentless, insisting it was fate, that a connection she had at a small rental agency owed her a favor. "Just the plane tickets," she said. "I'll handle everything else. Trust me once without fighting me." That last line hit a bruise she knew well. I caved. We flew into Florence, rented a tiny car, and started driving. It was supposed to be a 90-minute trip. It turned into 4 hours of wrong turns, empty villages, and roads that narrowed into barely more than dirt tracks. No GPS, no signal, just Claire holding a printed map that looked like it had been photocopied 100 times. "It's charming," she kept saying as we passed shuttered houses and leaning barns. "It's authentic." Her knee bounced constantly, though, and she smoked through half a pack at every stop. I told myself she was just anxious from flying. I told myself a lot of things. Love is mostly storytelling, and I was the only one bothered that mine didn't match the facts. By the time we reached the villa, the sun was low and my shoulders hurt from clenching. The place looked like a stock photo. Honeyed stone, perfect vines climbing the walls, flower boxes, a pool catching the sunset just right. It was so perfect it crossed the line into uncanny. Inside, it smelled like new cleaning products and old wood, and everything looked like it had been placed for a photo shoot 5 minutes before we walked in. Folded blankets, a bowl of lemons, wine already opened. I made some joke about hidden cameras, waiting for her laugh. Instead, she went quiet, walked into the kitchen, and ran her fingers along the knives in the block like she was counting them. "This is what we deserve," she said softly. "Finally." There was no property manager waiting, no cheerful welcome, just a note on the counter. "Keys are in the dish. Enjoy the peace." I checked the doors and windows out of habit. Claire poured wine, kicked off her boots, and put on music from her phone. We cooked pasta with whatever we found in the pantry, swam naked in the freezing pool under a sky so full of stars it felt fake, and ended up tangled in that antique bed, sweating and drunk and whispering half-serious apologies for every fight we'd had. Around 2 or 3 in the morning, I passed out. The last thing I remember is her tracing circles on my chest and saying, "Promise you'll never leave me unless I tell you to." I mumbled yes. It felt like nothing at the time. You never think the promises that damn you sound like that. I woke up alone. At first, I assumed she was on the terrace taking photos. Then the seconds stretched. Her side of the bed was cold, the bathroom empty, her camera untouched on the dresser. I called her name until my throat hurt. I checked every room, every closet, even laughed once at myself opening the wardrobe like I expected her to jump out. The villa felt wrong in the daylight, too still, too staged, like a rental someone forgot to actually live in. My phone was dead. When I plugged it in, nothing happened. No power. The router lights were off. The cords cut clean. The landline had no dial tone. The car wouldn't start. At some point, I stopped saying her name and started saying, "Okay, okay, okay," to the empty rooms, like the word could keep something worse from happening. I found the basement by accident, a door hidden near the pantry that I'd assumed was a closet. The smell hit me first when I opened it. Not rot exactly, but something metallic and sour that made my tongue feel coated. There was a bare bulb at the bottom of the stairs, swinging slightly in a draft. The concrete floor was stained in large, irregular patches, some dark and old, some still faintly tacky. In the corner, there were zip ties, some cut, some still looped. On a crate sat a stack of passports in a rubber band, and 2 Polaroids of couples by the same pool upstairs, smiling like we had the night before. My stomach dropped so fast I thought I'd pass out. I whispered, "Claire?" Even though I knew by then that if she had been taken, I wouldn't find her here. When the knock came an hour later, I almost cried from relief. 3 men, 2 in plain work clothes, 1 in a cheap blazer. The one in the blazer spoke English well, said his name was Marco, and that they were very sorry for the inconvenience. Behind him, in a van, I saw Claire, tied, tape over her mouth, eyes wide and shining. I stepped forward. One of the men raised a gun, just enough to make the point. "We are going to make a video call," Marco said. "You will speak very calmly to your parents. You will ask for money, and then everyone goes home. If you don't..." He let the rest hang there. I nodded, shaking. Love becomes a weapon very quickly when someone else puts their hands on it. They sat me at the kitchen table, phone propped up, Claire visible behind them, crying and muffled. The call connected. My mom's face appeared, blurry and confused. "Honey, why are you calling from a strange number?" I did what they told me. I said we'd gotten into trouble, that we owed the wrong people a lot of money. I said they had to send it within 24 hours or we'd be hurt. My father shouted in the background, asking where we were, telling me to involve the police. Marco pressed the gun gently against my thigh, smiling, his eyes on mine like we were having a friendly chat. "Please don't call the cops," I said, voice cracking, and I felt something in me snap at how easily I betrayed my own safety. We waited. Hours turned into a day. They kept us in separate rooms, me upstairs, Claire somewhere below. Whenever I screamed for her, someone banged on the door or turned the music up. They were calm, professional, annoyingly polite. They brought me water, let me use the bathroom with the door open, joked in low voices. "First love," one of them said once in the doorway. "Always the easiest." I didn't understand what he meant until the second night, when Marco came in with his sleeves rolled up and sat across from me like a therapist. "You know she helped us, right?" he asked. "Claire, she found you. You have good parents, good credit. She is very practical." At first I thought it was another mind game. Then he slid a folder across the table. My bank statements, email printouts, photos of us from years back, clearly taken from the street. A transcript of a conversation I'd had with Claire months before about how much my parents had saved for retirement. "She did not lie to you," he said. "She just left things out." The next time they let me see her, for a few minutes in the hallway, I searched her face for denial, for outrage, for anything. She just stared at me, jaw clenched, eyes flat. "I told you I'd get us out," she whispered when they pulled her away. "You just didn't ask at what cost." My parents paid enough to satisfy them. On the 4th day, they drove us both to a rest stop outside Florence and let us go with a final warning about the police and long memories. They walked away with our cash and my first real relationship gutted in front of me. On the flight home, Claire tried to reach for my hand twice. I moved my arm each time without looking at her. When she finally spoke, it was quiet. "You were always going to leave me. I just made sure I got something out of it." I didn't answer. There was nothing left to say. We broke up, eventually, quietly, without drama. How do you scream at someone for selling you out when you still flinch at loud noises and wake up smelling concrete and metal? I changed my number, moved cities, started therapy. Sometimes, though, I still get emails from burner accounts. Photos of new couples at villas, smiling by pools, sometimes with a brunette at the edge of the frame, hair pulled back, eyes on the camera. I don't open them anymore. I don't have to. I know the story they're telling. I didn't think I'd ever be telling strangers on the internet about my love life at 76, but here we are. My granddaughter calls this content, but to me it's just the only way I can get a heavy memory out of my chest. You should know a few things about me first. I was married to the same man for 48 years. I lived through 2 recessions and 1 war, and I buried my husband myself. I thought I knew what men were, how they moved, how they lied, and how they loved. It turns out I'd only ever met one good one. After my husband Robert died, the silence was the worst part. The house, which had always felt full, suddenly sounded like a hotel corridor at 3 a.m., all echoes and no life. My son bought me an iPad, so you won't get lonely, Mum. What I actually got was a front row seat to modern loneliness in high definition. I joined a widows group on Facebook because I didn't know what else to do with the thing. That's where I first saw him. Peter H., 61, retired architect, widowed. His profile photo looked like someone from a medical advert. Silver hair, soft smile, a dog in his arms. He'd written a comment under a post about anniversaries. Grief doesn't shrink. We only grow around it. Sending love to all of you. It was simple, sincere, and it hit something in me like a tuning fork. I checked his profile, mutual groups, a few pictures of him cooking, photos of hiking trails, an old Volvo, the dog again. Nothing flashy, nothing obviously fake. I told myself I was too old to be foolish and sent him a friend request anyway. My fingers cold with something like teenage dread. He messaged me first. Emily? Lovely name. Thank you for the ad. I hope this doesn't sound forward, but you have the kindest eyes I've seen in a long time. I stared at that line far too long. I checked every word like I was inspecting fruit at the market. Kindest eyes. Long time. Nothing obscene. Nothing urgent. He wrote like a man who had learned patience the hard way. Over the next weeks, he became a little routine. Morning. How did you sleep? Evening. What's the one good thing that happened today? Sometimes it was as small as the kettle didn't leak. He always responded as if it was profound. We traded grief stories, small confessions, and he never once tried to rush anything. He'd say, "We're old. We know there's no need to race if there's something real." It felt grounded, like I'd stumbled into a quiet room away from the noise of everything else. We graduated from messages to video calls. His face matched his photos, lines on the forehead, creases by the eyes, the dog nudging into frame. He'd laugh and say, "Morgan's jealous of the new woman in my life." His house looked ordinary, bookshelves, slightly yellow walls, an ugly plaid sofa. No luxury cars, no glitter. He told me he'd lost his wife to cancer 5 years back. I spent 2 years drinking myself stupid. Then one morning I realized she'd hated waste. So I stopped. She would have slapped me sober. The way he told it, he was wounded but functional. A healed fracture, not a festering wound. We talked about maybe meeting in the city halfway between us. Coffee, a walk by the river, daylight and public places. He never pushed for more, and that restraint was precisely what allowed me to trust him. The first hairline crack appeared in the most mundane way. I'm a nosy old woman when I want to be, and one night I clicked on his friends list. I expected to see a typical assortment of family and colleagues. Instead, I saw widow after widow. Lost my husband to COVID. Widowed at 55. Newly single, trying again. Dozens of them. All older women, mostly alone in their profile pictures. It could have been normal. People cluster with their own, but it felt curated, like I was looking at a garden he'd planted very carefully. I told myself I was catastrophizing, that the internet makes us all paranoid. Still, the next night I asked him, as casually as I could, "You seem to know a lot of women like me, Peter. All of us with ghosts." He paused, just a fraction too long, then typed, "I suppose damaged people seek each other out. We understand each other, don't we?" We finally met in person at a riverside cafe. In real life, he looked exactly like himself, which almost made things worse. Same soft smile, same steady gaze. He brought me a small bouquet of wildflowers, Nothing expensive, and a book of poetry he said had helped him sleep after his wife passed. "I thought you might like it if the nights get heavy," he said. We talked for 3 hours. He remembered every small thing I'd ever told him. My dislike of olives, the fact that my husband proposed to me in the rain, the way my left knee clicks when I stand. That level of attention feels like love when you're starved of it. Now I understand it can also be another thing. Data. He was taking notes just as carefully as I was taking comfort. The second crack came a week later, through something as petty as a typo. He sent me a message. "How are you holding up after your MRI today?" I froze, staring at the screen. I had not had an MRI. I had never mentioned any medical procedure except a blood test years ago. I responded, "What MRI, dear?" The typing bubble appeared and disappeared 3 times. Eventually he wrote, "Oh God, I'm so sorry I mixed you up with another friend. She's having some health issues. That was dreadful of me. Please forgive my old brain." It was plausible. People confuse threads all the time, but the pit in my stomach went cold, mixed me up. With another widow? Another woman whose schedule and health he was memorizing? The real break came from a woman named Margaret, whom I'd never met. She messaged me out of nowhere. "Hi, I'm sorry to bother you, but I think we have a problem in common. Do you know a man named Peter H., with a dog called Morgan?" My heart hammered so loudly I could hear it in my ears. We got on a call, 2 strangers with the same tremor in their voices. She told me her story, which sounded uncomfortably like mine. Same group, same gentle words, same dead wife, same river cafe. She'd gone further, though. She'd lent him £3,000 when he'd had a frozen account issue, and his pension payment was delayed. He'd wept on video, ashamed, begged her not to tell anyone, said he'd pay her back the moment things cleared. She hadn't seen a penny. When she'd started asking questions, he'd turned cold, accused her of suffocating him, of sabotaging his attempt to heal. Then he'd vanished, blocked her, disappeared, until she randomly saw him comment under a widow's post again, using the same script she'd once fallen for, and she recognized my profile in his likes. We compared timelines and screenshots. It turned out he was not just talking to 2 women. There were at least 5 overlapping conversations, all of us isolated, all of us hungry for exactly the tenderness he'd perfected. He'd built each of us a slightly different narrative. In one story, he was a retired architect. In another, a former civil engineer. In one, a son estranged. In another, a daughter in rehab. Enough variety that no one detail could be easily cross-referenced, but all revolving around the same core. Widower, quiet, looking to heal, understands grief. It was a character he'd rehearsed so many times he could improvise within it flawlessly. That was the part that made my skin crawl. This wasn't clumsy con artistry. This was practice. He was studying us the way a butcher studies cuts of meat. When I confronted him, I did it on a video call. I wanted to see his eyes when he lied. "Peter," I said, "how many widows do you talk to like this?" He blinked, once, and went into the performance I now recognize as his default, wounded confusion. "Emily, what's all this? I thought you trusted me." I told him about Margaret, about the overlapping lines, the reused phrases. There was a split second where the mask simply fell. His face went flat, like someone had flipped a switch. His voice lost the softness and came out cold and clipped. "You lonely women talk to each other too much," he said. "That's the problem with your generation. You can't just take what you're given and be grateful." My throat burned. "You practiced on us," I said. "You rehearsed your grief until it sounded like ours." He smiled then, a small, sharp thing I'd never seen from him. "You practiced too. You practiced being desirable again. Don't pretend you weren't enjoying the role." The most frightening part wasn't the cruelty. It was his detachment. He wasn't angry, not really. He was mildly irritated, like someone whose experiment had yielded a messy result. "I never forced any of you to send money," he said, almost bored. "I just gave you what you wanted. A story where you weren't invisible. You paid for the privilege. That's fair trade in my book." I told him I was going to report him, warn every group, send his face around like a wanted poster. He shrugged. "By next month, I'll be Thomas, widowed in a car accident. Different dog, different town. You'll forget me long before I forget you." There was no remorse, only calculation and a sick kind of pride in his own adaptability. I hung up, shaking, and sat alone in my kitchen, the hum of the fridge suddenly deafening. We did report him. We sent screenshots to admins, flagged his accounts, spread the word in groups we were in. He vanished for a while. 6 months later, a new profile joined one of the private forums. Tom, 62, recently widowed, trying to figure out this new world. Different surname, different city, same eyes, same pattern. I recognized his writing instantly. Grief doesn't get smaller. We grow around it. I typed a reply and then backspaced it. I messaged the woman who'd posted under his comment instead and warned her privately. I don't know if it stopped anything. Men like him don't retire. They just refine. They get better at finding the gaps in our boundaries, the spots where shame and loneliness make us malleable. And those gaps are everywhere when you're older, female, and grieving. People like to believe they fall in love the way rain falls, naturally, quietly, without intention. I used to believe that too. But loneliness reshapes you. It sharpens your eyes, refines your hunger, teaches you to plan the kind of connections other people stumble into accidentally. Before Lila, I was drifting, half employed, half awake, living in a studio that smelled like old carpet and burnt coffee. The days blurred. The nights stretched. I first saw her at a downtown bus stop on a Thursday morning. Someone laughing too loudly into her phone. Someone vibrant enough to make the air feel less stale. She had a way of tilting her head when she listened, the kind of habit that reveals a person's entire softness. I didn't approach. I only watched. And watching became routine. I told myself I was curious, nothing more. But curiosity grows legs when you're lonely. Soon I recognized her favorite coat, the mismatched earrings she wore on Fridays, the novel she carried for 3 months without finishing. I learned her schedule just by existing near it. The day I followed her into the Ridgeway bookshop, I almost convinced myself it was coincidence. Nearly. But as she drifted toward the poetry aisle, I felt something settle inside me, a quiet certainty. She picked up a worn, blue-covered anthology. I did too. She smiled, surprised at the shared choice. That smile cracked something in me wide open. "Good taste," she said. I pretended to blush. Guess I'm lucky. I curated everything that followed. The conversation about writers we both loved. The shy introduction. The light joke about destiny. She didn't know I'd spent weeks learning the shape of her life. And for the first time in years, loneliness felt like it had a purpose. Once Lila agreed to meet for coffee, everything accelerated. People think relationships bloom naturally, but a lot of it is choreography, timing, pacing, controlled vulnerability. I knew what to say because I'd listened to her talk to friends, overheard her frustrations about flaky coworkers, inattentive family, past boyfriends who took more than they gave. So I became the opposite. I became everything she'd never had. I let her choose the cafe. I let her talk first. I laughed at the right moments, softened my gaze when she grew nervous, leaned forward when she shared anything that sounded like pain. I wasn't lying, at least not always. I simply highlighted the best parts of myself and muted the others. "You're easy to talk to," she told me one night as we walked to her car. I shrugged, humble and warm. "I just listen." But listening is a tool, a mirror, a blueprint. Weeks turned into months. I became her late-night confidant, her emotional safety net. I learned the rhythms of her days, when she was tired, when she needed reassurance, when the world felt too loud. I offered comfort before she asked. She thought that meant I understood her on some deep cosmic level, but all it meant was that I paid attention. She introduced me to her sister, her friends, her quiet, book-cluttered apartment. I fit myself into her spaces like a piece she didn't know was missing. Our lives merged slowly, then suddenly. But something subtle shifted once she felt secure. She became brighter, stronger. She applied for a job she'd been scared of. She started going out more. She talked about boundaries, self-growth, independence. She was becoming someone confident, someone whole. And whole people are harder to mold. I noticed the change in her before she did. The way she double-checked her phone before answering, the delayed replies, the hesitations. Independence looks harmless at first. Small decisions, new routines. But then it starts pulling someone you love out of orbit. Her new job was the first crack. She had coworkers who invited her out after work. She had a boss who praised her. She had purpose. She didn't need my reassurance as much. "Are you okay?" she asked one night when I showed up unannounced outside her building. I forced a shaky breath. "Rough day. I didn't know where else to go." She softened. She always softened. But there was a flicker of something else in her eyes. Concern, maybe. Or realization. I began slipping small worries into the spaces she left open, telling her about stress at work, about my fear of losing everything. Nothing dramatic, just enough to pull her back toward me. But the effect was shrinking. She comforted me, yes, but she didn't collapse into the role like before. "We need to set healthier boundaries," she whispered one night. The words felt like a betrayal. Boundaries were for strangers, not for people who shared their lives. I tried harder. Small gestures, thoughtful gifts, surprise visits. But the more I did, the more she recoiled. She wasn't drifting. She was pulling away. "Can we talk?" she asked one evening, her voice trembling. I already knew what she would say. Relationships don't fall apart in a single moment. They decay in slow, invisible ways, like wood rotting behind a fresh coat of paint. And I wasn't going to lose something I'd spent so long constructing. She chose a neutral place, a quiet bench in the park near her apartment. Neutral spaces mean emotional distance. I knew that. She kept her hands folded tightly in her lap, like she was bracing for impact. "I care about you," she began. Never a good sign. "But I need space. Real space." I felt the world compress into a dull, pulsing ache. I leaned forward, lowering my voice, letting it crack in the right places. "Lila, you're my whole world." She looked away, eyes glassy. "That's the problem." She talked about boundaries again, about feeling cornered by my constant closeness. She said she needed time to grow on her own. I gave her every expression of heartbreak I could muster: shaking breath, wet eyes, long silences. In the past, she would have folded. She would have apologized. But she didn't. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm choosing myself this time." She stood up before I could stop her. I followed her to her building, pleading, but she held up a trembling hand. "Please respect this." She walked inside and locked the door behind her. I stayed on the sidewalk for an hour, staring at the window where her lamp glowed faintly through the curtains. People say heartbreak is clean, a single crack. They're wrong. It's jagged. It splinters. It spreads. I went home and paced my apartment until dawn. She thought cutting me off would end what we had. But relationships don't vanish because one person walks away. Not when one person has built the relationship piece by piece, day by day, detail by detail. She thought she was closing a door. But doors aren't the only way in. 3 days passed without a word. Silence can drive a person mad, or it can sharpen them into something terrifyingly focused. My hands shook whenever I thought about her laughing with her friends, sleeping peacefully, believing distance was safety. On the fourth night, I walked past her building, not to confront her, just to understand. The light in her kitchen was on. Her shadow moved back and forth as she cooked. I recognized the way she tucked her hair behind her ear. Even from the street, I could read her habits like a familiar book. She had changed her locks. I expected that. But habits are stronger than fear, and habits leave openings. A window on the fire escape, cracked open for air, just like she always left it. Lila hated stale rooms. She once told me it made her feel trapped. She hadn't thought about that now, or maybe she just forgot. I didn't climb. I didn't touch anything. I only stood there, staring up at the glow spilling from that narrow gap. And in that moment, something inside me settled with cold, unwavering certainty. She thought she'd escaped the version of me she couldn't name. The architect, the planner, the man who watched all the cracks and shadows of her life. She thought leaving meant ending. But endings aren't real. Not when someone knows the rhythms of your life as intimately as their own heartbeat. I stepped back from the building, inhaling the cool night air, letting the quiet settle into me. Love doesn't vanish. It lingers. It waits. And if someone isn't careful, it finds its way back inside through the smallest opening. Love built on control is not love. It is possession. Healthy relationships honor boundaries, independence, and consent. When someone tries to shape another person's life, choices, and identity, it's not devotion, it's manipulation. True love frees. It never traps, watches, or consumes. Some people say the rain in Washington feels alive, like it remembers who you were the day it first soaked you. I've lived in this town for 12 years, long enough to know the weather sometimes knows more about us than we admit. I built a quiet life here after a loud past. Mornings teaching art to restless teenagers, evenings feeding the strays who waited under my porch, weekends painting landscapes no one ever saw. Silence became my shelter, and routine became my way of keeping the past from cracking open. But silence doesn't erase memory, and the past doesn't stay buried, not when someone is determined to unearth it. Her name was Mira Calder. 5 years ago, she was the student who hovered too close to my work, stared too long, and spoke about art like it was a religion. She wasn't a student of mine, just someone who drifted into my community workshops and acted like she belonged there. She'd bring me coffee I didn't ask for, sketch me without permission, talk as if my paintings spoke directly to her blood. I brushed it off as eccentricity, until the night she crossed into something darker. I woke up in my own home, head foggy, body heavy, to find her sitting at the foot of my bed with a half-finished portrait of us sleeping together. She'd drugged my drink. She'd broken in. She whispered, "I kept you safe." The police removed her, and she vanished as if rain dissolved her. I rebuilt my life after that. Locked doors, changed routines, told myself she was gone. Then one gray Tuesday morning, I saw her again, standing outside my classroom window in the same yellow raincoat she wore the night she disappeared, smiling like no time had passed at all. At first, I thought I imagined her, just a ghost dredged up by exhaustion and old fear. But when I stepped into the hallway, she was there, leaning casually against the lockers like we were old friends. Her raincoat dripped onto the floor, and her eyes, the same intense, unreadable eyes, brightened when she saw me. "Ezra," she whispered, as if saying my name was a prayer. "I found clarity. I came back to fix what I broke." I felt the room shrink. "You weren't supposed to come back. I know your class ends at 3:42, she said gently. I didn't want to interrupt. The specificity clawed at something inside me. She shouldn't know that. She shouldn't know anything about my life anymore. But she did. Over the next week, she proved it, quietly, methodically, as if she'd been studying my routines from afar. A fresh lily, rain damp, appeared on my porch. Charcoal sketches of me, left between my mail. A journal slid beneath my door filled with rewritten memories of moments that never happened. Dinners we never shared, confessions I never spoke, affection I never gave. When I confronted her outside the school parking lot, she smiled softly. "We're soulbound, Ezra. You pulled me back with your silence." "That isn't real," I said. "Whatever you think happened between us, it wasn't love." Her expression cracked for the first time, revealing the unstable devotion beneath. "You're wrong. You always cared. You just forgot." The wind picked up, blowing her hair across her face. Then she added, almost lovingly, "I'll remind you." It wasn't a threat. It was a promise she believed in, and that terrified me more. Mira's obsession deepened fast, too fast for me to convince myself it was harmless. The next morning on my drive to school, I spotted something painted beneath the old railroad bridge. Our initials, intertwined, dripping black against the concrete. A week later, I passed a patch of wet cement near Miller Street. Someone had carved M+E equals home before it dried. The handwriting was unmistakably hers. I tried blocking her number. I tried ignoring the small gifts she left like breadcrumbs, pressed flowers, a scrap of canvas painted with my silhouette, the lullaby my mother used to hum when I was young scrawled in her looping hand. Each gesture was personal in a way that felt like an intrusion deeper than any lock could protect. One day, as I collected brushes after class, I heard humming outside the door. The melody froze my spine, the lullaby again. I opened the door to find her standing there, hands folded, eyes shining. "How do you know that song?" I asked. "You told me," she said with absolute certainty. "You share things with me when you're half asleep, when you're safe. I never—" "You did." She tilted her head. "You just don't remember." That night, I found my spare key missing from the planter where I hid it. My drawers had been disturbed, subtle but noticeable. She knew too much. She was inside the life I fought to protect. When I finally told her to stop, to leave me alone, she didn't get angry. She just whispered, "You can't shut a door that was never meant to close." Her calmness was more frightening than any rage could have been. The police told me to document everything, every intrusion, every encounter, every unwanted gift. "We can't act without evidence," they said. Evidence. As if trauma needs paperwork. I tried to keep distance, but Mira didn't believe in distance. She believed in inevitability. One cold November evening, her yellow raincoat appeared on my porch, folded neatly beside an envelope. Inside was a single page smeared with blood. Her blood, I suspected, with my name written backward across it. A message designed to unsettle, to lure. And it worked. I should have called the police. I should have walked away. Instead, fear and responsibility twisted together, pushing me to follow the clues she left scattered like a scavenger hunt. Each symbol pointed toward the outskirts of town, toward the abandoned greenhouse near the river where kids whispered about ghosts. The door creaked open with a sound like a dying breath. Inside, the air was thick with mildew and overgrown vines. Mira stood in the center, trembling, clutching a shard of glass. "I didn't know how else to make you listen," she said. "You always leave. I had to make you choose." "Mira," I said, hands raised. "You need help." "I need you," she cried. "If you walk away, I'll disappear again, for good this time." She lifted the shard to her throat. I lunged, not out of love, but desperation. The struggle knocked us off balance, and the rotted floor gave way beneath us. We fell through a collapse of wood and dirt and old roots. Pain shot up my leg. Mira's body hit the ground hard. When paramedics arrived, she clung to consciousness long enough to whisper, "Promise you'll finish our painting." Her voice still echoes in my dreams. People think closure comes neatly wrapped. They imagine a final conversation, a firm goodbye, a moment when everything aligns and the past dissolves. But trauma lingers like dampness, absorbed into the walls, into the bones, into the mind long after the storm has passed. Mira survived. Barely. I visited her once in the hospital, not because she asked, but because I needed to see the truth for myself. She lay still, bandaged, eyes unfocused, murmuring colors under her breath as if the world was a canvas she couldn't quite finish. When she noticed me, her lips twitched into a fragile smile. "You came back," she whispered. "I came to make sure you're alive," I said. She closed her eyes, satisfied. "That's enough." Her family moved her out of state for long-term care, and I told myself that was the end. That I was safe. That the yellow raincoat would fade into memory like everything else I'd tried to outrun. But some nights, when the town is quiet and the rain taps against my window, I dream of her, standing beneath a street lamp, that same coat glowing faintly. Not threatening, not violent, just waiting. I remind myself it's just a dream, a residue of fear, a mark she left that may never fully wash away. I lock my doors now, not out of paranoia but self-preservation. I change my routines. I talk to professionals. I teach my students boundaries as fiercely as I teach them brush techniques. Yet the rain still feels like it remembers, and sometimes, when I'm half awake, I swear I hear her whisper, "Don't forget our painting." I don't answer. Some warnings are meant to stay unanswered. Love cannot exist where boundaries are violated, and obsession is not devotion. It is harm disguised as affection. When someone crosses the lines that protect your safety, silence is not loyalty, and forgiveness is not obligation. Seek help, speak up, and protect yourself. No relationship, past or present, is worth losing your peace, your autonomy, or your life. I moved to Pahrump, Nevada, with the weight of my old life pressed into my chest. Dead-end jobs, a string of bad decisions, and an ex who thrived on chaos. I was done. I needed quiet, predictability, and somewhere my mistakes wouldn't follow me. The desert was perfect. Flat roads, endless sky. The kind of place where no one cared about the past because everyone was too busy surviving the sun. I found work at a small truck stop diner just off Highway 160. The mornings were slow, coffee machines hissing and the occasional trucker shuffling in for eggs and toast. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady, and that was enough. I kept my world small. Work, my tiny apartment, and the occasional grocery run. Routine was my armor. That's when Rowan walked in. It was one of those afternoons when the sun scorched every surface, and I could see the heat haze rising off the asphalt. He pushed the door open, leaving a trail of dust behind him, and smiled politely, though there was a tension in his eyes. Sunburned shoulders, cracked lips, and a suitcase he said was full of children's stories. "I collect these for people who need comfort," he said softly, placing the suitcase on the counter. "Some stories help when everything else fails." I laughed politely, more out of habit than amusement. Something about him felt safe, like a quiet lighthouse in a storm I hadn't admitted I was still in. He lingered for a bit, chatting about small things, trains, the desert, his favorite books. By the time he left, I realized I had written down his name in my mind, though I barely knew why. There was something in the way he noticed details, my hands shaking slightly as I poured coffee, the crease between my brows when I thought no one was watching. Something about Rowan whispered, "You can trust me." And for the first time in years, I almost did. Rowan didn't just appear at the diner after that first meeting. He started showing up in the evenings, always polite, always just enough to notice me without crowding. He would bring me little things, a coffee when I forgot mine, a mended curtain in my apartment, a handwritten note tucked under my door. At first, it was sweet. I'd never known gentleness like this. never someone who seemed to care without strings. "Thought you might like this," he said one day, pressing a tiny carved wooden bird into my hand. I felt my chest tighten. I wanted to say, "Thank you," but I didn't. Not yet. I wanted to see the world without him first, to test the weight of trust. But then the line started blurring. Rowan was always where I was. At the diner, he'd appear at the window just as I stepped outside. He knew my shifts, my favorite coffee, the way I tilted my head when I was worried. He'd insist on walking me home, saying he couldn't sleep knowing I might be followed. "You shouldn't trust anyone else," he murmured one evening as we walked past a nearly empty street. "Not after everything you've been through. I can protect you." I tried telling him I was fine. "I don't need protection," I said, keeping my voice calm. But he would smile, sweet and patient, as if I were a frightened child who didn't yet understand. I laughed when he brought me more trinkets, when he fixed my leaky faucet without asking, because a part of me wanted to believe the safety I felt was real. Yet, there was a tension, a quiet undercurrent I tried to ignore. Sometimes, I'd see his eyes lingering too long, memorizing my movements, as if each step I took belonged to him. I told myself I was imagining it, that the desert had a way of making people feel watched, even when they weren't. And yet, when he left, I felt the emptiness behind him, the absence of warmth and protection all at once, like the desert swallowing a fleeting shadow. It didn't take long for Rowan's care to twist into something darker. He began documenting me. At first, it was small things. A note left under my door about a suspicious car, a reminder that I had been safe that day. But then, I started finding photographs, me sleeping, me eating, even reading in my living room. Each was labeled meticulously, a timestamp and a note, like, "He was watching you today." "You're safe here," he said, standing in the doorway one night, eyes wide. "I just want to make sure. I can't let anyone hurt you." I wanted to believe him. I did. But the tension in the air made my stomach knot. This wasn't protection. It was control. I tried to distance myself. "I think I need space, Rowan," I said one evening at the diner, hoping the words would reach him. He looked crushed, as if I had pulled the desert wind from under him. "You don't understand," he whispered, voice trembling. "They're all out to get you. Only I know. I can save you. You can't do this without me." The knife came a week later. He insisted it was only for protection, but I saw the way his hands trembled as he held it, the way his jaw tightened with a thin smile. "We can leave," he said. "Just you and me, away from everyone who wants to break you." Fear coiled tight in my chest. I realized the gentleness I had trusted was gone. What remained was an obsession, a delusion so deep that even my refusal couldn't stop it. When he finally grabbed me, pulling me into the desert under the fading sun, I fought. Every instinct screamed survival. The dunes swallowed our footprints as the wind whipped sand into my eyes. The desert was cruel, but it was mine now. I ran blindly, heart hammering against my ribs. Rowan chased me, relentless through the dunes, his shadow a ghost clinging to mine. Sand stung my skin, filling my mouth, every grain a reminder that the desert did not forgive hesitation. "Why won't you stay?" he yelled, voice carried by the wind, distorted and desperate. "I'm keeping you safe." I dodged an uneven ridge, collapsed for a second behind a mound of sand, and then pushed forward. My apartment, my friends, my life, everything was behind me. Survival was the only thing ahead. I thought I heard him pause as the storm began, but the sandstorm was a veil. By the time I emerged hours later, exhausted and dehydrated, search teams had found me near a trail. My body ached, my mind reeled, but I was alive. Rowan was gone. Days later, his body was discovered, curled near a dune. The wind had erased the struggle, but not the terror. I remembered his whispered words carried on the desert breeze. "Even now, I kept you safe. Why didn't you stay?" I returned to town, forever marked by the desert silence and the echo of a man's love turned deadly obsession. My apartment was empty, my life quiet, but the memory lingered like a shadow at sunset. I never fully trusted anyone again, but I learned something hard about boundaries, fear, and instinct. Rowan's charm had masked danger until it became undeniable. The desert taught me its own lesson. Beauty and danger often travel together, and the gentlest touch can carry the heaviest weight. I returned to work at the diner eventually, moving through my routines with a careful precision. I smiled at strangers, helped travelers with coffee and directions, but the old openness I had allowed Rowan vanished. And yet, even in fear, I found power. My instincts had saved me. My choices had freed me. No amount of control from another person could strip away the life I fought to keep. I understood now. Safety is a responsibility you must claim for yourself. And love without respect and boundaries can be the deadliest illusion of all. People say every office has a quiet guy, someone who blends into the carpet and hum of fluorescent lights. I've never minded the title. Quiet men live longer, professionally and otherwise. They're underestimated, overlooked, assumed harmless. That works for me. Silence isn't emptiness, it's information gathering. Long before Maria ever knew my name, I knew hers. She was the kind of woman who apologized for taking up space, even when she wasn't. She'd hold the elevator doors open for strangers who never said thank you. She'd type with this delicate rhythm that made her seem like she didn't want to disturb the keyboard. I noticed. I always noticed. Most people at the office drift through their days half aware. They vent about deadlines, inhale microwaved lunches, pretend their lives are bigger than they really are. But Maria, she had this quiet determination, like she was trying to hold herself together with tape no one else could see. The day I found her crying in the employee restroom, she didn't see me. I remained behind the cracked stall door, watching her wipe mascara from her cheeks. I memorized the small, shaky breath she took before whispering, "Get it together." She looked so breakable then. People like her need someone reliable in their orbit, someone observant, someone like me. So I started gently weaving myself into the rhythm of her day. A warm smile, a well-timed compliment, a cup of coffee placed on her desk, exactly how she tried and failed to order it every morning. Not too sweet, light cream, room on top. She thanked me like it was a coincidence. But nothing I do is a coincidence. You learn a lot when you watch people closely. What they carry, what they hide, what pieces of themselves they reveal only to the air when they think no one's around. Maria had tells. She twisted her necklace when she was nervous. She tucked her hair behind her ear when she wanted approval. She apologized when she felt small. So I made myself the person she didn't have to apologize to. When she laughed at something I said, a quiet, startled kind of laugh, it felt like confirmation, like proof that my attention was the right kind, the necessary kind. Then she mentioned her boyfriend. Not in a bragging way. More like she was reminding herself he existed. "He's a good guy," she said once, but her eyes drifted toward her desk, not toward any place where affection should live. I didn't react. I never react. Jealousy is what sloppy men feel when they act before thinking. I prefer strategy. Over the following weeks, I paid attention to details she didn't know she revealed. How often she checked her phone, how her smile tightened after certain notifications, how she flinched at the word weekend like it meant obligation, not rest. Their relationship was strained, cracked at the edges. I didn't cause that. I only observed it. A crack doesn't come from pressure applied once. It forms from long-term stress, from weight someone isn't built to carry alone. One night she stayed late, shoulders slumped, fingers stiff from typing. I offered to walk her to the parking garage. She hesitated, then nodded. "Thanks," she whispered. "You're always so steady." Steady, reliable, safe. The words fit me like a tailored suit. She never saw how carefully I curated that image, how much calculation sat beneath every calm smile. That invisibility was my greatest advantage. People assume manipulation requires force. It doesn't. The most effective persuasion is quiet, unnoticeable, like a slow leak in a foundation. You don't see the damage until the wall caves in. Maria's boyfriend was careless with her. He forgot things: birthdays, promises, rides home. He treated her like a convenience, not a choice. She didn't complain out loud, but I saw it. The way she shrank a little after every excuse he fed her over the phone. The way she smiled apologetically when she covered for him. So I helped the truth grow. A casual comment here. A sympathetic look there. A well-timed pause when she mentioned him. Not judgment. Just enough doubt in the air for her to breathe it in. But I stayed disciplined. No accusations. No overt meddling. Just presence. One night, after a fight she tried to brush off, she sat at her desk long after everyone left. Her eyes were red, her voice thin. "He said I'm too sensitive," she murmured. I leaned against her cubicle wall, arms folded. Or maybe he's not sensitive enough. Her breath hitched, like she'd never considered that. That was the moment I slipped inside her guard. Quiet, familiar, inevitable. She began coming to me more often. For advice. For comfort. For that steady calm she claimed I radiated. I didn't have to push her away from him. Her own doubts did that. I simply held the space where she felt seen. But the truth is simple. Safety offered by the wrong person is just another kind of trap. I made sure she never realized the difference. It unraveled faster than I expected. Maybe I miscalculated. Maybe she wasn't as breakable as I thought. Or maybe she finally saw the threads I'd been weaving, the way I always knew when she left for lunch, how I appeared beside her at the exact moment she needed reassurance. One morning she avoided eye contact. The next, she kept conversations short. By the end of the week, she was sitting on the opposite side of the break room, like the distance could protect her. Then HR called me in. Maria had filed a complaint. Too attentive, she claimed. Boundary crossing. Uncomfortable interactions. I kept my expression neutral. Hurt, confused. The perfect mix of professional disappointment. HR believed me instantly. Of course they did. I was the guy who held doors open, who baked cookies for the holiday potluck, who remembered birthdays. A complaint against someone like me sounded petty, emotional, irrational. She might be stressed, they said gently. Try giving her space. I nodded, thanked them, left the room with a sympathetic frown. When she saw me later, she realized. No one believed her. Not one person. That moment broke something inside her. She looked at me with fear she tried to hide, and I saw every ounce of it. She finally understood what I was, but understanding doesn't mean escape. She started leaving work earlier, taking different hallways, switching her routine. She thought unpredictability would save her. But patterns aren't just schedules. They're breaths, gestures, glances, and I already knew all of hers. Avoidance isn't a solution, it's a stage. Fear has a rhythm, and Maria fell into it perfectly. The more she tried to distance herself, the more tightly her life wound around itself. She stopped laughing at work, stopped eating lunch, stopped meeting anyone's eyes. People thought she was burning out. I knew better. She was unraveling. One evening, long after the office emptied, she came back inside looking for a file she claimed she left behind. Her hands shook when she rifled through papers. The silence felt heavy, electric. She knew I was there before she even turned around. "Please," she whispered. "Just leave me alone." Her voice cracked. It almost moved me. Almost. "I'm trying to help you," I said softly. "You're scaring me." You weren't scared when you needed me. She backed away, but I didn't step closer. I didn't need to. Fear brings people close all on its own. You don't understand, she breathed. You've crossed lines. I cross lines for people I care about, I said. Everyone else stays outside them. She shook her head quickly. I'm not yours. A quiet laugh slipped from me. You don't get to decide that now. You chose me every time you leaned on me. I'm the one who showed up when he didn't. I'm the one who saw you. Her eyes filled with tears, but she held her ground. This isn't love. No, I replied, but it's what I deserve. She ran then, past me, through the stairwell, out into the night. I didn't follow, not tonight. Breaking takes time, and when she finally shatters completely, I'll be there to gather the pieces. Some people don't need rescuing, they need claiming. Before Sierra, I didn't think of myself as the kind of man who could be left. I believed I was steady, the type who stuck around when things got hard, the type people stayed with. Growing up in a quiet suburb in Indiana, my parents were the sort of couple everyone pointed at and said, "That's what lasting love looks like." Maybe that's why I expected permanence, even when the signs of collapse were right there, blinking like hazard lights I refused to acknowledge. Sierra wasn't like anyone I'd dated before. She had this spark, the kind that lights up rooms without trying. We met at a friend's barbecue. I remember the moment she laughed at my stupid joke, the first spark of something I mistook for destiny. She was warmth in human form, sharp-eyed and quick-witted, with a smile that felt earned instead of automatic. For a while we were good enough for people to comment on how well we fit together, good enough that I started imagining things like shared leases, Saturday grocery runs, a future. But the problem with people like Sierra is simple. They think they want comfort until comfort becomes routine. Then they crave chaos again, even if they pretend they don't. She ended things in the kitchen, sunlight coming through the blinds in those thin knife blade lines. Her voice was soft, gentler than I deserved. I care about you, she said, but I'm not in love with you anymore. I think I haven't been for a while. Soft words cut deeper. They let you feel the blade instead of numbing you first. She moved out 2 weeks later, 2 streets away. Close enough that I could see her porch light from my driveway. Close enough that the ending felt unfinished. Close enough that I couldn't stop watching. After she moved, I tried pretending distance mattered. 2 streets, a 5-minute walk, a 2-minute drive. That's not distance. That's a pause, a breath, a misunderstanding waiting to be corrected. At first I kept to myself. I didn't text her, didn't show up at her door, didn't ask mutual friends how she was doing. I figured she needed time to remember the truth. That comfort isn't boring, it's safe. That routine isn't stagnation, it's stability. That I wasn't the villain her loneliness might have painted me to be. But every evening when her porch light flicked on, a part of me tightened. I'd sit in my truck at the end of the block, engine off, watching the faint glow spill across her walkway. Sometimes I heard her window slide open, the one in her bedroom she used to crack when she said she needed fresh air to think. I knew that sound like my own heartbeat. The first night she had a visitor, it felt like betrayal disguised as laughter. He wasn't anything special. Tallish, forgettable face. The kind of man who buys whatever brand is on sale and calls it a personality. I watched him hand her takeout and kiss her cheek lightly. Too lightly. Politeness masquerading as affection. She didn't replace me. She downgraded. The next morning before she woke up, I left something small on her porch, a flower she once tucked behind her ear on a beach trip when the wind was relentless and she'd laughed into my chest. A reminder, a breadcrumb, a gentle nudge toward memory. People think reminders are manipulative. I think they're merciful. It's easy to forget what mattered when you're scared to admit you miss it. When she opened the door and found the flower, her shoulders tensed. Good. Tension means the story isn't over. I never hid from her. Not once. That's the part people always misunderstand. Predators hide, monsters lurk. But I'm neither. I'm someone who cared enough to stay visible, someone willing to be seen even when it hurt. The night she caught me outside her window, the air smelled like rain and exhaust from distant traffic. She'd opened the blinds halfway, probably thinking she was alone. She froze when she saw me standing near the edge of her yard. "Jacob," she whispered through the glass, voice shaking. "What are you doing here?" I could have given her a dozen truths. Checking on you, making sure you're safe, waiting for you to remember. Instead, I said nothing. Silence speaks better than clumsy explanations. Her eyes widened, fear replacing softness. "This isn't healthy," she said firmly. "You need to leave." Her words didn't sting because they were untrue. They stung because she said them like I was a stranger. "Don't do this," she added. "You're scaring me." I didn't move. "Sierra," I murmured. "Look at me." She did, reluctantly, and for a moment it was like old times. Her gaze locked on mine, breath caught, heart racing. "You made me this way," I said quietly. Not angrily, just honestly. She stepped back like I'd struck her, then slammed the blinds shut. Later that night, I left a book she never finished on her porch. A soft reminder that I knew the details she forgot, the parts of herself she abandoned when she walked away. Fear changes people. It distorts their vision. It makes them rewrite history so they can escape accountability. She wasn't scared of me. She was scared of admitting she never understood what devotion looks like. When Sierra started dating again, I wasn't surprised. People like her can't sit in stillness long. They need noise. Someone to fill the empty spaces with compliments, meaningless gestures, predictable affection. Her new boyfriend checked every box in the safe rebound category. His name was Eric. He had an office job, a half-hearted beard, and the emotional depth of a puddle. I watched them walk into a restaurant one night, her hand in his, her smile forced. Forced because she thought happiness should look a certain way. Forced because she was performing normalcy. Forced because she wasn't healed. I stayed far enough that she wouldn't notice, close enough to read their lips. He talked about work, sports, some show he was watching. She nodded, laughed too loudly, leaned closer than necessary, pretending hurts more than honesty. Afterward, they went for a walk along the river. I followed at a distance, footsteps muffled by the soft dirt path. I watched the way she tucked her hair behind her ear, the same way she did with me. Old habits don't vanish. They resurface when people try too hard to start over. When he kissed her goodnight outside her door, she hesitated, barely. But I saw it. Later, I left her a message on her porch, simple black ink on white paper. He doesn't see you. I do. Not a threat, a reminder. A week later, security cameras appeared. One on the porch, one above the garage. The sight made me laugh quietly. Cameras catch criminals. I wasn't breaking in. I wasn't touching her property. I wasn't trespassing. I was just watching. And you can't arrest someone for watching what used to be theirs. Fear changed her routine. I noticed it immediately. She checked her porch twice before stepping outside. She kept her phone clutched in her hand even when carrying groceries. She stopped sitting near the front window in the evenings. Fear rearranged her life with meticulous precision, like she was building an invisible fortress around herself. But fortresses only work when the threat is outside. I was already woven into the foundation. One night I drove past her house and saw her sitting on the couch, knees pulled to her chest. The TV flickered blue against her face. She wasn't crying. She just looked tired, like someone trying to outrun a shadow that kept appearing no matter which direction she turned. She reminded me of the version of herself I fell in love with. Honest, fragile, unable to hide her emotions. I almost walked up to the door, almost knocked, almost said something like, "You don't have to keep pretending you're better off." But I held back. Timing matters. People open up only when the ground beneath them starts to crumble, and hers was cracking more every day. 2 mornings later, she dropped her keys in the driveway. They clattered loudly enough for me to hear from down the street. She looked around fast, scanning shadows, breath sharp. That's when I knew she still felt me, still sensed me, still carried me somewhere in her thoughts. She keeps telling friends she wants me gone, but fear is a language she speaks fluently now, and it calls my name more clearly than her voice ever did. One day, she'll knock on my door instead. One day, she'll want the closure she pretends she doesn't need. One day, she'll understand that stories don't end when someone walks away. They end when I say they do. I hadn't planned to stay in Appalachia, not really. The mountains had always been a cage, and I'd spent my 20s chasing escape routes, cities, jobs, relationships that burned too fast and ended quietly. But death has a way of pulling you home. My last living relative, Aunt May, had been more mother than family, and now she was gone. The cabin was mine, but only in the sense that it carried her scent and the echoes of memories I didn't want to face. The funeral ended before the sun set. I lingered for a moment in the cemetery, watching the mist curl between the stones, thinking of all the people I'd left behind. Everyone had moved on. Everyone but me. I wasn't sad. I was exhausted. The cabin sat a half-mile up the hill, empty and quiet. I wanted to sell it, collect what I could, and vanish again. But that night, as I pushed open the cabin door, the swing on the porch creaked. Someone was there. A woman, barefoot, a lavender dress streaked with mud, eyes closed in some impossible serenity. My chest froze. "Kai," she said, and the voice carried a weight I recognized instantly. My throat tightened. "You came back to me." It was Leora. My first love. The girl I'd left behind when she tipped too far into something dangerous, something intoxicating. She looked the same yet older, sharper, more fragile, like glass polished by years of wind and solitude. I don't understand," I stammered. What are you doing here?" "I came to apologize," she whispered, brushing a hand along the swing's chain, almost reverently. "I've changed. I'm different now. I only want you to know that I never stopped caring." For a moment, I believed her. Loneliness is a hungry companion, and the mountains seemed smaller somehow with her presence. I let her in. I didn't know then that letting someone into your life is never simple, not when love has claws. Leora's presence filled the cabin in ways I couldn't have anticipated. She moved like she belonged, rearranging old furniture, humming under her breath, slipping her hand into mine like we had never been apart. She knew things no one else could have guessed. The exact drawer where Aunt May kept the kitchen knives, the names of my childhood pets, the way I liked my coffee in the mornings. "It's all part of knowing you," she said one afternoon, tracing my forearm lightly. I've always remembered. At first, it felt comforting. I'd spent years in solitude, and here was someone who not only remembered me but seemed to hold the fragmented pieces of my past like treasures. We talked for hours about nothing, about the festivals we attended at 17, the music we loved, the stars we watched from the hill behind the cabin. But slowly, the details that should have been charming became unnerving. She knew when I went to town, which friends I met, and how I liked to keep my nights empty. Sometimes, I would catch her watching me from the doorway, a soft smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Kai," she said one evening as I tried to retreat to my room. "You can't hide. I just want to be close. I'll keep you safe." I forced a laugh, brushing off the discomfort. I wanted to believe her. Loneliness had a way of convincing you that obsession was care, but I also felt the pull of something older, something that warned me to step back. By the end of that week, I realized that the girl I had loved wasn't entirely gone. And what returned wasn't just affection, it was a force that wanted to reshape the world around her. And I was at the center. The first night I noticed the photographs was subtle. I returned from the grocery store, carrying bags in both hands, and there she was, hunched over the table. Faces were being cut from old photographs, my mother, my friends, my first boyfriend, carefully, obsessively. I'm trimming the past, she said, looking up with that soft smile. It hurts you. I just want to take the hurt away. I felt my stomach twist. Leora, this isn't healthy, I said. My voice was firm, but even as I spoke, part of me hesitated, paralyzed by the history we shared. I'm helping, she murmured, slicing another photograph. I've learned to love properly now. Let me keep you safe. Let me keep the pain from touching you again. Her devotion was intense, unyielding. She followed me to town, confronted anyone who dared glance at me, whispered threats in a honeyed tone. Each time I tried to push her away, she collapsed into sobbing rages, begging me not to leave, claiming she would rather die than live unloved. I slept little. I watched her move through the cabin, her hands lingering on my belongings, her eyes scanning my life as if memorizing every inch. I wanted to leave, to reclaim solitude, but the mountains outside the cabin seemed infinite, the roads twisting and familiar. She had me cornered in more ways than one. One night, the storm came. Lightning split the sky, rain slicked against the roof. When I returned early from the diner, the cabin was empty, the front door swinging. On the table was a note, smeared with red, her handwriting, frantic, precise, asterisk. I'm offering you the same devotion you offered me. Find me, asterisk. Panic swallowed me whole. I grabbed a flashlight and ran into the forest, mud sucking at my boots. The mountains had never felt so dangerous, the darkness so alive. And then I saw her, standing at the edge of a cliff, wind whipping her lavender dress, knife poised against her chest. Kai, she whispered, voice barely audible over the storm. Choose, life with me, or death with me. I stepped closer, careful, hands raised. Leora, step back, you don't have to do this. She tilted her head, hair plastered to her face, eyes wild but luminous. I can't survive without you, she said, trembling. I only wanted to be one with you, to take all your pain, all your memories. I can't exist in halves, my heart hammered. I can't let you hurt yourself, I said, voice cracking. I reached for her, but in her desperate leap forward, the knife grazed my shoulder. Pain flared, sharp and real, but I couldn't pull away. Kai, she cried, collapsing against me, shaking with a combination of fear and relief. Mud smeared our clothes, rain ran down our faces, and I realized with clarity, she didn't want to kill me. She wanted to merge, to become inseparable in a way that was terrifying and unsustainable. I called for help, voice breaking over the storm. Emergency teams arrived quickly, and Leora was restrained and taken to a psychiatric facility. I watched her disappear into the night, feeling the hollow ache of someone who loved too fiercely. Months later, letters began arriving, poetry, memories, vows of eternal devotion. I never answered, but I read each one. Sometimes, I stood on the porch swing she had once slept on, whispering her name into the mountains, listening to the wind carry it away. I learned something about love in those months, about its power and its danger. Love can heal, yes, but it can also bind, twist, and consume. Leora's obsession was a warning. Even the most beautiful devotion can be deadly when boundaries are ignored. I returned to the cabin, eventually restoring my routines. I cooked my meals, repaired the walls, and walked through the mountains with the sun on my back. I smiled at people in town, but I kept my distance. I never wanted someone to wield love as a weapon again. Not for me, not for anyone. Still, the letters arrived. I read them, feeling the pull of the past, the gravity of a love that refused to die. I didn't respond. I didn't want to. But some nights, when the wind howled through the trees, I whispered her name, letting it float among the mountains where it belonged. I realized finally that love, no matter how intense, must be tempered with respect, patience, and boundaries. Without them, it becomes possession, not partnership. Some passions cannot coexist with life. They demand either total surrender or destruction. True love respects autonomy, boundaries, and life itself. Obsession masquerading as devotion can destroy the very people it claims to protect. And survival sometimes means letting go, even of what feels eternal. I had spent my life studying attachment disorders, obsessively analyzing patterns in others, while keeping my own connections shallow, neat, and professional. My office in Chicago overlooked the loop, and the city pulsed below like a living experiment in human behavior. I was respected, sharp, and, more importantly, untouchable. Until Julian Vale. I met him at a forensic psychology conference. He was polite, articulate, and magnetic, in the way some people just draw you in without trying. He listened, truly listened, as if my words were the only ones that mattered. For the first time in years, I felt visible. We started with debates over case studies, but they became long midnight walks. One night, after a heated discussion about obsessive behaviors, he kissed me. It was electric, the kind of chemistry that made me forget every rule I had about distance and boundaries. Soon after, we were sharing apartments, meals, and nights that blurred between tenderness and desire. And then, the first shadow appeared. Julian flinched at loud noises, became anxious if I left the apartment without telling him, and sometimes stared at me with such intensity it made my chest ache. Once, when I hesitated before leaving, he cried quietly at my door. "You promised you wouldn't leave like the others." I excused it, attributing it to trauma, believing love could heal. I didn't know then that the person I thought I loved was a carefully constructed illusion, a mask hiding obsessions I could never predict. It started subtly. Little inconsistencies in his stories, job titles that never checked out, family details that seemed rehearsed. Julian spoke as though he was being honest, but my mind, trained for patterns and deception, picked up anomalies. One evening, I confronted him. "Julian, who are you really?" I asked, voice steady but tight with anxiety. He went pale. Then, as if the weight of decades pressed on him, he crumbled. "I made it all up. My name, my past. I didn't want you to run from me. I couldn't risk showing you the real me." I felt my chest tighten. The man I had trusted, the one I let into my life fully, had fabricated his entire existence to keep me close. My expertise clashed with my heart. I forced a breakup that night, saying words that felt like knives in my own chest. The terror began almost immediately. That same night, my office door was unlocked. On my desk sat a bouquet of lilies, with a note scrawled in handwriting I recognized instantly. "I'll learn to be whatever you need." I hadn't told him where I worked. Someone had followed me. Soon, emails appeared from my account instructing colleagues that I needed extended leave. My key card vanished and reappeared under my pillow. Drawers shifted in my apartment. Mugs moved slightly. Windows unlocked. The lines between professional life and invasion blurred. Julian was everywhere, yet nowhere. My survival instincts overrode my training. I set up traps, small measures, pieces of tape across cabinet cracks, flour near door frames, a hidden camera in the living room. It was methodical, almost clinical, and for a while, I felt a semblance of control. Then I returned one evening to find every trap disrupted. The tape was broken, flour trampled with footprints, and the camera missing. A voice, soft and deliberate, came from the shadows. "You're so brilliant. I love watching you think." Julian stepped from behind my bedroom door, calm, trembling, and impossibly close. His eyes glistened with an emotion I couldn't name: adoration, or madness, or both. I grabbed a lamp. "Stay back," I screamed, swinging it against him. Glass shattered against his jaw. He fell but smiled, bleeding, whispering, "You hit me? That means you still feel something." I ran. The neighbors called the police as Julian crawled into the hallway, still reaching, still murmuring, "I love you." Officers found detailed sketches of me in his bag, and a notebook titled, "Ways to be Perfect for Her." He was restrained and transported to a psychiatric hospital. But the adoration didn't leave him. It lingered in the space he once occupied, in the memory of his voice. I moved cities soon after, changing my phone number, email addresses, and routine. I rented a modest apartment and immersed myself in work, trying to reclaim the analytical detachment I had once held as a shield. But sometimes, in the quiet of my new place, I would smell cigarette smoke drifting through a cracked window, or feel the faint echo of someone watching me. The experience haunted me, not just for the danger but for the violation of every boundary I had maintained. Julian's obsession wasn't just love, it was possession, manipulation, and meticulous stalking. It had turned my own expertise against me, a cruel mirror of everything I had warned others about. Weeks passed. I slowly rebuilt routines, checking locks, varying schedules, and trusting instincts over appearances. I never answered the letters he sent, poems, confessions, declarations, but I read them, because part of me needed to understand the depth of his obsession. Therapy, long walks, and journals became my tools. I realized that my work could never inoculate me from human vulnerability. The mind is brilliant at predicting patterns, but the heart often blinds us when desire and trust are involved. I resumed my career cautiously, mentoring students in forensic psychology and speaking about obsessive attachment. Now, from the perspective of survival as well as study, I taught them the warning signs, the red flags, the ways obsession manifests before it becomes violence. Some nights, I sit in my apartment, lights dim, sipping coffee, and the memory of Julian's adoration drifts through my mind like smoke. It's a reminder, love without boundaries is dangerous, and obsession can hide behind charm, intellect, and attentiveness. I rebuilt my life carefully, learning that survival requires vigilance, assertiveness, and boundaries that cannot be compromised. Freedom isn't just physical, it's emotional, intellectual, and personal, and no one, no matter how persuasive, deserves to erase those boundaries. True love respects boundaries, autonomy, and honesty. Obsession masquerading as devotion can become dangerous, and survival depends on recognizing red flags, trusting instincts, and protecting both mind and body. I first noticed him in the hospital cafeteria, where I worked long shifts as a nurse. It was late afternoon, and the fluorescent lights made everything feel unreal. Like a scene in a dull dream, he was sitting alone at a corner table, sipping coffee with deliberate slowness, well-dressed, neatly combed hair, polite, too polite for someone who didn't work there. There was a soft smile on his face, the kind that made you think, asterisk, he couldn't possibly hurt anyone, asterisk. The first time he spoke to me, it was casual. "Hi, I hope I'm not interrupting. I just noticed you like your coffee with skim milk and 1 sugar." I laughed nervously, assuming he must have overheard a conversation at the counter. He shrugged politely. "I just happened to notice. That was all." Innocent, I thought. A week later, he was back. This time, he brought a cup to my table. "I passed by," he said again. "Thought you could use a refill." I smiled politely, but a tiny unease prickled at my spine. Why times was times he passing by my table every day? I told myself I was overthinking it. Nurses see strange things all the time. Patients with paranoid delusions, odd relatives, the nightly chaos of the ER. Surely, this was just a man trying to be friendly, but the feeling didn't leave me. He lingered near the cafeteria exit when I left, and I could swear he was watching, memorizing. That night, I dreamt of him standing in my apartment doorway. I woke to the sound of my front door clicking, but nothing was there. I laughed it off. I had a busy shift in the morning. "It's nothing," I whispered to myself. I wished it was. The letters started 3 weeks later. I came home from a 12-hour shift, exhausted, and found a folded envelope on my doormat. My name was written in elegant cursive that immediately set my teeth on edge. Inside was a single sheet of paper, neatly penned. "I watched you laugh at the cafeteria today. The way you tucked your hair behind your ear, so gentle, so unaware. I want to be the one to hold that moment forever." I froze. My apartment door was locked. No one had entered. I knew, instinctively, it was him. The letters became a rhythm. They arrived daily. He knew things I hadn't told anyone, my childhood town, my favorite cafe down the street, even the scent of my mother's perfume that I always wore. One letter said, asterisk, "I love you more than anyone ever could. I only want to keep you safe, even from yourself." Asterisk. I tried to laugh it off to my friend Mara. "It's kind of romantic, in a creepy, weird way." Mara's eyes narrowed. "Nina, he's stalking you. That's not romantic. That's dangerous." The fear settled in my chest like a stone. I started noticing things. A scarf I swore I left in my drawer missing. My favorite coffee mug moved from the kitchen counter. Every time I glanced out the window at night, I thought I saw him standing across the street, always out of full view, always silent. Then I met someone new, a paramedic named Josh. He was kind, funny, and everything I wanted in someone. But 3 nights later, his tires were slashed, and his apartment door smashed in. The note that arrived at my apartment the next day contained a piece of the broken door tied with a ribbon. It wasn't just letters anymore. He was escalating. I moved 3 towns away, thinking distance would help. A new apartment, new streets, new coffee shops. I changed my routines, locked every door twice, even had new locks installed. I thought I was safe, but it didn't matter. 1 week later, I found my scarf neatly folded on the kitchen counter. My heart stopped. He had found me again. Every instinct screamed at me to call the police. But how do you report a ghost? A man who blends into the world like air, leaving only traces, only whispers, only letters. I started noticing him everywhere. Outside the grocery store, walking past my apartment, sitting in the cafe reading the same newspaper I picked up. I avoided eye contact. I hurried home, checking every corner, every shadow. One night, I returned from work to find my cat trembling on the doorstep. The door had been locked. She hadn't escaped. On the pillow was another letter. You shouldn't have locked me out. It makes me feel unwelcome in your world. I began to sleep with knives under my pillow and double-checked windows a dozen times. Every creak of my apartment made my blood run cold. I started imagining him breaking in while I slept, whispering in my ear, his soft smile terrifying in the dark. Finally, I confronted him outside a grocery store. He looked at me like I had betrayed him. You and I were meant to fix each other, he said, voice soft, almost tender. Stop running. I'm the only one who will love you enough to hurt for you. My body shook. There was no reasoning with him. There was no bargaining, only fear. Weeks later, the police finally had him. He had attacked the wrong woman in an attempt to reach me. I watched from behind the squad car, hands trembling, as they dragged him away screaming my name. Relief should have washed over me. But it didn't. He had been caught, yes. But the terror didn't leave my apartment. I still jumped at the sound of a rustling leaf outside the window, the creak of a floorboard. I found fresh flowers on my porch sometimes, and I couldn't stop thinking. Asterisk, is it him, or someone else trying to warn me? Asterisk, counseling helped, friends helped, but every small noise reminded me of him. Every letter, every whisper of wind through the trees, carried the memory of his voice. Soft, tender, terrifying. I started locking windows before leaving for work, sleeping with the lights on, avoiding late-night walks. Slowly, the panic ebbed, replaced by a quiet vigilance. I knew the world hadn't ended, but it had changed. I moved again, farther this time, and slowly tried to rebuild my life. I started dating cautiously, trusting myself to read signs, trusting my gut when something felt off. I refused to let fear dictate every moment, but the memory lingered. Sometimes at night, I swear I hear someone breathing in the corner of my room. Sometimes flowers appear on my porch without a note, a gift without explanation. I've learned to live with the uncertainty, the tension, the knowledge that someone who once knew me so intimately could become a monster in the shadows. The moral? Awareness and boundaries matter. Trust your instincts. Danger often hides behind ordinary faces, and obsession doesn't require a name to be real. Your safety is not negotiable. It is yours to claim and protect. Life continues, but I carry caution now, a lesson learned the hard way. Love can be dangerous, and not every smile is harmless. Never ignore your instincts, and never underestimate how dangerous someone can be when obsession disguises itself as love. Boundaries and self-protection are not just rights, they are survival. I first noticed Aaron during sophomore year, but I didn't pay much attention to him. He was quiet, polite, the type who helped teachers stack chairs after class, and never drew attention. People said he was harmless, the good kid everyone assumed you could trust. I thought he was just another face in the crowded hallways of our high school. It wasn't until junior year that things started to feel off. He always seemed to know where I would be at my locker, in the library. Even walking across the quad, I chalked it up to coincidence at first, but then I started noticing the notebook. He carried it everywhere, thick and leather-bound, and sometimes I caught glimpses of it when he scribbled notes. At first, the notebook seemed innocent homework assignments, reminders, but slowly, I realized it contained pages filled with details about me. My schedule, conversations, habits, even things I had never told anyone. It was like he was cataloging my life in private, obsessively. I tried to tell myself it was harmless, maybe even flattering. He never spoke to me directly, mostly just smiled politely from afar. But the unease in my stomach grew with every day I noticed him watching. I started locking my bedroom door, checking the windows twice, and glancing over my shoulder whenever I walked home. The turning point came when I found the first note slipped under my locker. It wasn't aggressive, just chillingly intimate. Asterisk, I know you better than anyone else ever will. Asterisk, my hands shook. I wanted to laugh it off, to tell myself I was overreacting, but deep down, I knew something was very wrong. It escalated quickly after that. Aaron started inserting himself into my life in ways that seemed coincidental but weren't. He offered to tutor my little brother in math, claiming he wanted to help. He started, coincidentally, hanging out near my friends, asking about my weekend plans, slipping into conversations as if he belonged. One evening, my boyfriend from the soccer team texted me in a panic. His car had been keyed with the word "times mine asterisk." At first, we laughed nervously, blaming some random vandal. But then a message arrived from an unknown number. "He doesn't deserve you. Not like I do." My blood ran cold. I confronted Aaron once at school. "You need to stop. You're scaring me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He tilted his head, soft smile in place, and shrugged. "I'm just looking out for you. You don't understand how much I care." I tried to avoid him, but he found ways to be everywhere. He even convinced my mom he was a good kid who needs guidance. At home, my sense of safety dissolved. Every knock on the door, every shadow in the hall made me flinch. Then came the photographs. I found them taped behind my bedroom mirror, photos of me sleeping, crying, even brushing my hair after a shower. A photo of my bruised knee from a week earlier, though I never told anyone. And one of me lying in bed, eyes closed, with a shadow looming over me. My heart froze. I realized then that he didn't just want to be near me, he wanted to own me. The first break-in happened a week later. I woke to the sound of someone shifting on my floor. At first, I thought it was a dream. Then I saw him, Aaron, sitting there, calm, watching me sleep. My body froze. "You don't understand how deeply we're connected," he whispered. "I know you better than you know yourself. I've taken the time to learn you. That's what love is." I screamed, and he didn't flinch. He cried, begged me not to ruin what we have. My mother called the police immediately. By the time they arrived, Aaron was calm, polite, even charming. He claimed he heard me crying from the street. Without clear evidence of entry, they couldn't hold him. He walked away,